Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of Paravine's Into the Rift. As always, I'm your host, Daniel Dracos. I'm calling this the Team Fortress 2 episode, 20th episode. We're all wearing various hats. We've got our spy, Raz, always eager to put his face on random pictures, I guess is why I'm calling you the spy. I don't know, man. What do you have to do now? Emily with the charming Ocelot-level scarf. We'll call her our medic. Why not? And our resident demo man and occasional shit talker, of course, Steven. I don't know what I am. I guess because I'm tiny.
I actually do play Demo Man, but I play Soldier more.
Okay, Soldier. Well, Soldier's kind of like dumb, and I didn't really want to compare. I was like trying to find the ones without like negative traits.
That's a good point.
Anyway, moving forward, let's talk about
Demo
a game that's significantly better than that, and it's significantly less based on hats. League of Legends, of course. So this week we have two experts in their respective scenes. We have Raz, of course, an expert on China, specifically LSBL, but we're going to talk about LPL this week. And of course, Emily Rand, our BR expert, me and Steven here to provide you with general knowledge across the board, although everyone's pretty up to date. We're going to get started with BR tonight, and the first thing I want to talk about in BR is that BR does something very different from what the rest of the world does. In North America, in Europe, across the board, when teams or players or organizations generally screw up, obviously we see a lot of fines. CLG fined, of course, for poaching. We saw MYM fined a little less than expected, $5,000, recent debacle. Meanwhile, in BR, when teams mess up, they're not fined. They lose circuit points. So think of it like in LCS, if we were to, or in LCK, let's say, in that format from last year, how you would get 3 points for a 2-0 and 1 point for the 1-1, right? Well, they lose those points if they do something like swap out players early or swap out players late. We saw this happen to Kaboom Black, I believe. Emily?
Well, Kaboom Black was docked 4 points at the start of the season because they changed 4 members of their roster, their qualifying roster. Only Espeon stayed. So that's why they were docked 4 points. And that happened before the season even began. And then additionally, most recently, Jayab was docked 2 points for an illegal roster substitution. Their AD carry, Theusma, they swapped him out for the Fox. And as I understand it, and you have to understand my Portuguese is very bad, so I am translating these things for myself. And if I am incorrect, someone please feel free to correct me in chat. But basically, the Fox, their AD carry substitute, was not listed. So when they went to sub him out, even though he's been a substitute for the team, just thing I don't understand, he wasn't listed as a substitute, so they got docked 2 points going into this week.
And this is a team that's kind of already suffering this season. And so I guess my general question is, how do we feel about these two systems? Like comparing and contrasting between the NA and EU system, which is obviously very heavily based in fines, whereas in BR, a lot of points are getting docked. And I know especially for Kaboom Black, this has been pretty huge because they're a team that's actually been performing pretty well, and they're placed so low now because they were docked 4 points before the season even began. And that's one clean sweep and a 1-1 that they're just denied in points. Like 2 of those are just no longer relevant because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're put in a very precarious position from the point system. They're a strong team. They're, I believe, 6-4 now in terms of just like raw like win-loss. It would put them in, I believe, tied for like 4th, 5th place, which would have them avoid being in, hopefully being in one of those bottom 3 spots that has to fight for relegation. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting system. I think, in my opinion, it hurts a lot more than finding a team because, I mean, if you have a team that's just like, oh yeah, whatever, you know, we'll just give you the money, it's fine. But it doesn't actually affect much. So this does seriously affect teams. In terms of Jab, they were kind of already at the bottom and they were having internal like chemistry issues. So they even released a statement that said that they were going to work on fighting for relegation going into the next split instead of, because I mean they're at -1, I think, total points. So it's even if they were to win out, I think they would still end up in one of those bottom 2 spots most likely. So
here's my question on this, because Kaboom Black, they did swap out a major portion of their roster, but is it just a Brazil kind of specific rule? Because if the roster itself holds, if the organization holds the slot in any other region, they can just like swap out every member. Nothing really would happen.
Yeah.
And
I honestly don't know if
Mhm.
I'm assuming it's as far as I know it's the only region that
because it
we
seems
have
to
that
me
issue.
like CLG would have lost a hefty number of points already
Oh,
if
yeah.
this was the system. I mean, and like I think fines are important too, and it's fines are an issue because it seems to me like most of these organizations that are established, like CLG, that are making these decisions that are somewhat questionable, they can afford to lose 10 grand. Like that's not the end of the world for them. Small organizations may suffer more, but like CLG would definitely not do something again if they lost points for it and it lowered their standing because it's like.
I feel like that
But-
matters more.
But at the same time, as a fan of that team, like let's say you're like a diehard CLG fan, like I guess I'm a CL. I'm not diehard,
You
but I'm a
are,
CLG fan.
Daniel, just admit it.
I love
If
you,
they-
CLG, but you keep hurting me, and it's so hard to love
Okay.
you.
I really wish I could have watched that CLG TSM game with you, by the way. I just would have
my
loved to
God.
hear the reaction.
Oh my god. I was like, we'll talk about it later, but
Yeah,
basically,
yeah,
like,
we
the
will.
first 10 minutes, I'm like,
Crying on
oh
the
my
floor.
god,
Have a
they're so
comment.
good. Look at Double If and After Roam. I can't believe, I'm like, Scara said that they shouldn't roam, and it's working. What? This is crazy. CLG, next level. Like, oh my god, no one sucked in Pick Ban. Anyway, we'll get there later. But for me, like, as a fan, as someone who isn't an analyst, like, as an objective fan who like just wants their team to do the best, there's nothing like you don't give a shit if your team is fined 10 grand. Like that doesn't affect you as a fan at all. But your fan just like getting dropped 2 places in the standings or more, depending on how close the set is, especially how close NA is, like that's pretty devastating. And it seems to me like BR might lose viewership because of this, and that might be why we don't see NA or EU do a similar kind of strategy.
I'm not sure. I don't think they've lost viewership. I mean, it's weird because you're going into this split is the first offline tournament that they've had, so it's very difficult to actually discern whether, that's affecting viewership or not. I think it also has to do with the fact that it's an overall point system as well, because you are playing sets of 2, so it's 3 points for the sweep and then a 1-1. Kaboom Black has split almost all of their sets except for one.
Is that old IG I hear?
I know, no, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, now they just have to like ramp up for playoffs and just be like, bam, like go.
Sounds like my favorite Chinese team ever, Snake. Thank you very much. The
No.
the Legends of the 1-1.
Oh baby.
Old Invictus Gaming, yeah. But
A much happier comparison for anyone who. Yeah, there's no. We'll get to Snake later too.
I mean, specifically for Kaboom Black, the really cool thing about that team is they have thus far proven they can kind of mix it up with some of the higher teams. They have the 2 toughest teams in the league coming up this week and next week, in Cade and INTZ. So we'll continue to see. I mean, if they split 1-1 with them, like they split 1-1 with Pain Gaming, which is also like one of the teams considered to be the best. So we'll see. Things are really difficult for them though because of that point docking for sure.
So let's look at Keat and INTZ. You said they're like the 2 toughest teams in the league. INTZ is a team we've talked about pretty much every time we bring up BR. Obviously, looking like the strongest team in the league. Has anything changed? Are they still just kind of like making their way effortlessly through the league? I mean, what is it like? How are they leaps and bounds ahead of the competition at this point, or is it like just a slight skill gap, but they're keeping it up? You know what I mean?
It's difficult to say. I believe they are the best team in Brazil by far, but not because of
#by far.
Yeah. I didn't mean to do that. But the reason is just because they're smart, and of all of the teams, they're the best at adapting to different situations and trying to make them work. Their jungler is ridiculous.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't seen Revolta is an exciting player to watch.
Volta's
He's
awesome.
He has been playing out of his mind. And additionally, the team is just, I think, in terms of macro strategy compared to other teams. I think they're just a bit smarter, which is weird because going into the season, that's not how I would have described that team at all. So it's their learning curve is actually, and I get like their learning curve from where they were over the summer in the qualifier to where they are now is ridiculous.
Do you know? Do you know about their coaching staff at all, or their support staff?
I don't actually.
I'd be really curious to see, because it seems to me, because the narrative that you first sold me on when we talked about INTZ was this challenger team, players with incredible mechanical skill, like probably the best in their positions. And like most challenger teams, they were really, really awful at macro strategy. But they did interesting things in the early game, and they could snowball it a lot. Like that's kind of, the general challenger team strategy is like shit on them in the early game and like let's snowball it out of control, and then you can end a game regardless of how comfortable you are with macro calls in the late game. But they've done better. I mean, like the first games that I got to watch them play, they've done better. You've obviously been watching them a lot longer. So it would be interesting to me to see if a coach had stepped into that, or if these players on an individual level have simply like taken their game to the next level, like spent the time and done the research to do so, because that doesn't happen very often.
I would say I honestly don't know about their coaching staff. I do know that as a team, they get along very well. They seem to get along very well, both in game and out of game, which makes, because like you can get along well out of game, but they also seem to get along well in game, which is really, really good, because it means that even if they're doing something dumb, they're doing it together. So like even the mistakes they do make, they're typically doing them as a team, which makes a difference.
100% agree. Okay, so talking about team communication and interpersonal relationships, let's look at Keyed Stars. Obviously a split roster, Emperor and Daydream, former of CJ. We talked a little bit about them last week. You said that they are playing one style. You even went so far to say as they look boring, and I would agree with that. They are boring to watch. They do the most basic, unexciting, and this is BR, which is not like China in its innovation. You're not going to see anything crazy like support Maokai. Which isn't bad, honestly. But it's really odd, even from like this team, to see that. Like, what's going on with Keyed Stars? Is this a communication and interpersonal issue? Is this more or less?
I'm not sure what's going on with Cade. I know that a lot of people don't share my opinion in the fact that they're just very boring. But when I say they're boring to watch, like for example, they might make fewer mistakes than like, I don't know, Pain or INTZ. And I'm not even saying that's true, but just in general, like it's comparing like the finesse of like good fencing to like bludgeoning someone with a hammer, like a baseball bat. Like that's what Cade is. Like they just steamroll. Like their games this week, they just stomped. But like if you look at what they actually did in game, it was standard lanes and standard jungle pathing and really, really boring. So like, I mean, I'm not like trying to crap on them or anything. It's just when you look at that team, I feel like they're going to have a problem when they do have to play INTZ again or play Pain again, because Pain actually looked really good this past week. And I think that could be an issue, and it could be reflective of, I don't know if they are having problem communicating in games, so they can't run something with a little bit more finesse, or I don't know. It's not what I expected at all from that team.
It actually kind of reminds me of OMG in that sense. It's like I've seen a few INTZ games, so I'm like, that's like the only thing I can actually ever comment on is INTZ. And but they surprise me. Like they actually not on the really this is BR surprising me that this is a BR team. No, it's surprising me on a Western standard, in the sense that like they pull certain things that honestly no other teams in the West would do. And it's not that doesn't make them a good team on the level of like higher than the top of LCS standards, but like they think of these very creative tactics And sure, the only thing that's really stopping them, the only thing that's really putting them backwards is the sense that their rotational plays and all this isn't the strongest. But other than that, they always force the enemy team to react to their plays, and that's what I love about this team. It's great.
Yeah, and Cade does not do that. They just
By the book, as far as if there is a book. I don't know. I feel like I guess
I guess it's kind
like
of
I guess
by the book.
for example, the thing I noticed in the two games, and like true, they're playing a lower team, so obviously they're expected to win. They're favored to win like very heavily, but the no deep wards, no lane swaps, no scouting, like.
okay. See the
And I don't know if that's just like BM, they're like, this team is so bad, we don't even have to do it, or if it's just a reflection of their, I don't know.
Okay, well the thing is, when you tell me a team is boring, I assume that means that they play very like a vanilla game of League of Legends, like standard
do.
lanes, like contest dragons, push down turrets, like rotate accordingly, like just very standard strategy, no like crazy innovations. But when you tell me that they don't deep ward and like move across the map well and respond, that suggests like sloppy play, which I think could be complacency, like we're just so much better, why even try? Or that could just be that they're bad, which I think is a big concern. Like that is a legitimate no, because like
Oh,
no matter how
Ooh,
mechanically
burn.
no matter how mechanically good you are, you can't do that shit. Like I know you didn't say it.
Wow.
BR fans, I'm sorry if that. Well, I'm not sorry if that offends you. If you're not deep warding, like you're not winning games. Like holy shit, this is a meta where you need to deep ward. Like every meta is a meta where you need to deep ward. Deep wards are love. Deep wards are life. Like you can't not do that, and that is concerning for me because like Cade Stars or Keat Stars or however you say it, they have a strong lineup, and like in the same way that OMG, for instance, has a very strong lineup, but like. You need to still put in. If you don't take your game seriously and you get complacent, you're just waiting for someone to like shit on you. Or when you go to international play and the competition steps
You will
up,
get
like
dumped
your
on, yeah.
your mindset will not be in the right place, and you'll just get dumped. Which is like I expect things from BR this year, other than taking a game off of Alliance, and lots of things actually.
If they take
I don't
another
know.
game off of Alliance, that would just be the best.
If elements now not can
Right,
make it
right.
to Worlds, if they make it to Worlds, which is.
Well, I mean,
And
it's
they're
only the
just-
first split, so hold on there.
And it's something worth mentioning that of course there's a tournament going into, I forget, it's like the mid-season, it's replacing All Stars,
Mid-season
right?
international, I think it's called MSI.
MSI.
Yeah, and there's a wildcard tournament going into that, so teams like for Australian teams, I think Brazil, I think that's
Brazil's
the
going to
idea.
be
but
the wild card. Yeah.
And so those teams are going to win. And honestly, from what I've seen from OPL, from what I've seen in Brazil, I think the Brazilian team's going to come out ahead.
Same.
I think they will go in. Because I don't even think Brazil. Here's a massive issue. Even going into the last season, I don't think Brazil is by any means, or even they've evolved from a wild card team. They have. You have to give them their own slot, and because. It comes down to what does the infrastructure have to offer. And right now, Brazil is a legitimate infrastructure. They have their own league. They have their own sets. It's all LAN. And even before that, the teams have all played competitively. Of course, now the organizations have enough money to obviously like get in Korean players. And so
And
the
pay
competition
staff,
right
like coaching staff and
yeah,
stuff.
exactly. So the competition has risen up to the point in which they have to accept that and give them their own slot. I'm not sure what's going to happen, obviously, because the next World's in quite a while. But now Brazilian teams are going to be taking a wild card slot. In my opinion, it feels like it's kind of assured, and that really takes away from other wild card teams that don't have a well-off system.
The
Well,
thing
and- No, go ahead.
The thing I'm curious about is if, and I'm not trying to make the argument that we shouldn't give Brazil a spot or we shouldn't give any region a spot once they get strong enough, but that begs the question: when other regions start getting to the international level, like what Brazil, NA, EU, China, Korea, how do we change the format of Worlds? And how
right.
often might we have to change it if other regions start getting stronger? You know what I mean?
It feels to me like we just make Worlds bigger, and that's not a big deal. Because if you're
It shouldn't be a
increasing
big deal, I
the
know.
relative talent pool and you have more regions involved, heavily involved, like, all right, let's do it. Like, more teams in groups, more groups in the group stage. Like, it does create a longer tournament, and you don't want to reduce the quality of games, but if we're getting to the point where regions are stepping up, like Japan is now emerging as a region, obviously, like starting to do things, probably not ready for Worlds yet, probably should compete for an international wildcard slot. Like, why not? They should be allowed to. But eventually, like, obviously, LoL is still very young as an esport in comparison to something like StarCraft or Counter-Strike, right? But you still have to, like, give it this room to grow. And I think you're right that by denying or by putting BR into the wildcard slot, you're just guaranteeing that that's the BR slot until the end of time, because BR is ahead and they're going to stay ahead. Like, you don't just catch up that quickly. So
And something to notice, like the debate could be made about making worlds larger, and that it won't really. You see a lot more benefits, but then at that point you'll have something like IPL 5, and now everybody has a lot of things like lovely things to say about IPL 5 because
IPL 5 is the
heard that
best. Come
IPL
on.
5 is the best ever.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And it is the golden standard by which we should compare all other
100%.
tournaments.
Honestly,
remember writing-
after IPL
Yeah.
happened, I was really upset with myself that I went to World Season 2 and not IPL 5, and I was like, I can't believe I didn't go to this instead.
I remember making an article in which I said that I felt like that IPL 5 was like the greatest tournament in League
It
of
is-
Legends.
I think
That
it's the
was.
best tournament.
But it does
Really.
like. With that being said, IPL 5 had, I think, out of the like multiple positives you have, there's one backside and like one problem with it, and that's a debatable problem because people have different things to say about it. But what IPL 5 did, it has so many teams, like there were so many teams, and at the same time they had losers bracket as well. That you have, I felt like I didn't do the count obviously, but it's like 100 something. It had to at least be 100 games, and there were so many games that they had to happen at the same time, and so you split viewership between the different streams, and by doing that, they were just simply games that you just missed because you're like, I choose this game instead of that game, and I'm not going to watch the VODs for this game even though something crazy happened. And it was just like, at that point, it's a great system, but you run the risk of having simply too many games running that you kind of have to run them. Either it's going to be a long tournament, like what Dota did. I think like Dota had a very long. Like, probably a
TI4
month
was
long, I think.
long, but they
Yeah.
didn't go to like LAN officially. They didn't have like a live stage until the bracket. So a
Okay.
lot of their matches did take place at the same time during the group stages and the early,
And-
I guess the earlier brackets.
And that could be a thing that you can work on, is that even like FIFA World Cup soccer, that's what they did. Like in the sense that they had qualifiers that were basically just as important in the sense it was a very long. It's always a long process, but after you are done with your specific region, you move into a different group in which is kind of like a closer knit, like BR teams face NA teams, etc. And then finally they get on the world stage. But that's just obviously it's a long way from now, but it's something to improve on.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to like digress the topic to Worlds, but
No, but so I think it's first off, I think the League of Legends community in general, we fucking love Worlds. I don't know why. We shouldn't like local results. I think matter and very much, and I think more than Worlds in a lot of ways. But I think the Worlds format is very important because, especially for a lot of regions, it defines your value in a global
Yes.
context, and it gives your region a lot of credibility. Whether or not it should, and it's arguable, but it does. Like that's how it works currently. If your region does good in Worlds, or you do something that gives your region, I mean, just like let's just beat the dead horse. Like Kaboom Black beating Alliance. A lot of more people are interested in BR because of that. You know what I mean?
Not black.
Kaboom Orange.
No,
Sorry.
yeah, thank you.
I'm seeing a better Kaboom team.
But yeah, that's why I brought up Worlds, because you're right. It does, since we're starting to talk up more smaller regions, that does beg certain questions for future structure of Worlds.
And it's something we can look to in the future as we move forward. But like obviously right now it's a
Yeah.
little too far off to tell. I would like to think that by the time this season 5 Worlds comes around, that BR will have its own slot. But if it doesn't, it's obviously
Season
going to win the
6?
wild card slot. And then season 6, like give them the slot, Riot. They're just going to keep being the wild card. No one's interested in watching that tournament anymore because we know BR is going to win.
Yeah.
It's just going to be Brazilian teams jumping people, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess like all of Worlds is a Korean team jumping people, right? So like we can't.
Well, I mean, then you bring up the question, like, do you want Worlds to be the most competitive tournament, or do you want it to be a celebration of teams around the world? Because if it's the most competitive tournament, then the format is
KR in China.
different.
KR China,
Korea,
SK.
all
That's-
Korea and China, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
China won Worlds and Dota again, and no one cared that there weren't equal slots per teams. Well, they kind of were, but they all got, like, most of them got eliminated by the final bracket stage.
Dota's interesting and confusing, but there's pandas in it, so we know Kelsey's interested. So if
Exactly.
you've got panda news, let us know. We'll bring her on the show next time. We can talk about pandas. Um, all right, so the last thing I want to talk about before we close out for BR for the day is Pain Gaming, formerly like the top dogs of BR, struggling a little bit this season. Obviously not doing terrible, but not as good as they've wanted to be. They looked really solid this week. With some pretty impressive games. Most notably, they ran the infamous kind of like protect the carry team where you've got the Nunu, the Janna. They ran Rumble with it too, which worked pretty well.
They ran the snake comp.
Snake comp.
Daniel, they ran the snake comp.
Is that how you're describing it? See, Chris didn't mention that. Chris gave us a
bless.
briefing for those.
Well, it was Nunu jungle, Janna support. Yeah, so you got Beast, you got Ella, you got BRT. Now I'm just teasing.
The look in
Oh,
Raz's face
yeah.
when you said that.
I hate that composition because it's so
I did.
effective.
Yeah, I just love teasing Daniel about Snake. But no, it was a very Snake composition. It was, we're going to protect the AD carry until they get to late game, and then they're just going to murder people. No, the reason why Pain looked so good actually was not the protect the Cogmon composition, although I was very happy to see that Pain was actually picking compositions, and specifically compositions that didn't just rely on Sivir.
Or compositions where Kami doesn't have to play Morgana. That's my other favorite thing that they do is make Kami pick things that he can't do.
Hey,
John.
he had a sick Azir. Did you see that?
Oh my god,
Daniel?
that 4-man Azir. Oh, bless.
I'm not. Azir is good. You can carry with Azir. My only thing is it's like
Yeah, I know,
you
that's
just
what
can't
I'm
put the
saying.
man on
Yeah,
like
but the-
Morgana.
Oh my god, that
Carry.
4-man Azir was so
Yeah.
beautiful.
The thing that actually made it really impressive is because he was rotating down from mid, and then their jungler Sir T was right there with the
And there's 4
Nunu
people taking the
to do-
tower.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
it was really, really well coordinated. But that's my point. That's why Pain looked good, not because they had a snake composition, but because they're actually thinking of compositions and they're thinking of how to use them. And additionally,
Pain
they're actually
was very
rotating
impressive
to take
this week.
objectives. Like I was like, where has this team been for the past however many weeks?
They were learning. They're in school.
BRTT.
They waited
They-
until
trying
after
to, trying to
IEM.
play Callista.
Botching their picks and bans and relying on Sivir until this week.
They waited until after IEM San Jose. It's like we're gonna start ramping up. Yeah.
I don't even want to talk about it.
We're going to talk about Unions of Love and
Yeah.
F Jungle,
Tell me
which is
about
never
Really?
not a fun topic. Man, what was I going to say? Okay, well, the thing I will say about this composition in general is that level of self-awareness from the team, that they know that their weaknesses, they know that BRTT isn't the strongest player, and so they cater to him in the same way that Snake might cater to Crystal. Different reasons. BRTT does not feed, but he just isn't as strong of a player, whereas Crystal's a very strong player, he's just very stupid. So, so it's a little different, but the thing is,
I can roll that, yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
the reason I like this comp is they run it twice, but there's variants. In the second game, they run Kog'Maw with the Xerath mid, and the Kog'Maw is obviously the protect the carry style composition. But in the first game, they run Corki, and while you don't think normally this would be the kind of protect the carry, well, it isn't. They use Azir in the mid lane as the carry to benefit from that Nunu scaling, and that Blood Boil, whereas Corki kind of mitigates that early game like weak stage for Azir, lets him get through that power trough really nicely with his own power spike, and like. I really hope that this was all planned and intentional, and they like really thought these comps through, because that is a higher level of champion select than we've seen from, I would say, most of BR. I would say most BR games in general, even from good BR teams. Like, we don't see that level of coordination, and you saw other teams start to ban stuff in future games too. Like Lulu and Janna were both banned like repeatedly this week, a lot. Because this comp has been suddenly popping up in BR, and it is so effective, like kind of like Raz said earlier.
Well, Kaboom Black has played Lulu in a flex position a couple times, if I recall, and they ended up flexing it down to Espeon in the bot lane, and he did well on it.
The best Janna in the world? No, I'm joking. Probably not. But those Janna games.
Janna's really good, okay?
Good.
Like,
No, I'm not
fight
joking.
with
That's
it.
what I'm saying. It's really the best Janna in the world is hyperbole, but like he
He
is
carried, man.
He hard carried that last
So
game.
good.
But yeah, I mean, they're getting there in Champ Select. Some teams are obviously better than others. I would like to think that Pain is actually thinking about these compositions. So they had a good week, and not just because they're against like a lower team in the standings, but in terms of like you have Cade. And like I said, it's just bludgeoning someone over and over, and like that bat is bloody, but you still just keep beating them to death. Like that was the way they won. They won their games against the lower teams. Pain did it with finesse through their champion select, and they did it through actually rotating to take objectives. And that's actually why I liked watching Pain so much this past week.
Kami and BRTT just have to do well so they can stay in the scene and look pretty.
Oh, wow.
What?
Oh,
They
Daniel,
already. I mean, they're bad. I'm
we
not trying to
know
say.
why.
Ulterior motives.
League of Legends.
Oh, of course I have ulterior motives. I always have ulterior motives.
That's a good point, you know.
Dan with the flame. Damn.
I just want more CNV games, okay? I want more Nepon.
I'm not saying they're bad. I'm saying they're, well, BRTT we can argue, but Kami's good and he's pretty, so it helps. All right. Well, on the subject of middle of the pack teams with glaring weaknesses, mostly based around the 80 carry, let's talk about Team Liquid and North America. And,
Oh, we're starting off big here.
Nice.
This is the big
Nice.
All right, Piglet benched, replaced with Keith McBrief. Keith McBrief, notable for successfully playing Kog'Maw. In the
Latukan
first
has
week of the
arrived.
LCS, and getting them a 2-0 start. Piglet notable for, in theory, raging, although there's some argument on that topic. Obviously, Reddit going back and forth. Known for not speaking English and feeding and not doing very well in the games, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I mean, apparently the
Like- Oh yeah, go for it.
no, apparently the raging at his own team thing was hearsay, and just like a game, the game of telephone, and Best got kind of mixed up. But apparently he did rage quit scrims because he got like smashed in the lane or something. So that's the problem, I guess. I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's more to it, but
It's
that's
I mean,
what I
it's
know.
never just that simple. And obviously, he's got to be in a shitty position coming here to play League, playing on a team that cannot communicate with him.
Yeah.
But regardless, you shouldn't be rage quitting scrims, and that's
You-
just kind of
you
like.
No, Piglet is someone that I know. I think I spoke to this in like a really early episode, or maybe I just talked to you, Daniel, about it. But like,
Talking about Piglet.
Piglet is someone who I was kind of worried about more than other Korean imports because he is very. Someone once told me in an interview that an AD carry is someone who needs help, and Piglet is someone who needs help. He's very emotionally volatile.
he's very prideful.
He's very, he's very proud. He's very, very proud.
Well, and
And like I know a lot of times, even when he was duoing in Korea with Pooh, it would always be like Pooh kind of like holding his hand, calming him down, like keeping him in check and keeping him energetic and happy just by being kind of like a calming presence. And he was also really close to his mom and his sister, and like even though he had that whole interview where his whole impetus for becoming a pro gamer was that his mom said no, and he was like, "Screw you, mom! I can do this. Like I can work hard. I can." And
then,
like,
I mean,
and that's, I mean, their relationship is actually seemingly really strong, and he's very headstrong, and he's very determined, and he can work hard. But at the same time, very emotionally volatile, and putting someone in a high pressure situation, very far away from home, without any sort of support network, like regardless of what Team Liquid did to try to make him comfortable. And like, you can argue that that might be a whole separate issue, but like, regardless of what they had in place, regardless if you had something incredibly strong in place, I still think Piglet would have struggled just because of his personality.
okay, hold on, Braz. I know you want to talk about Kog'Maw, but I just want to finish.
I'm done with the Kog'Maw thing. I think I can like actually fit that in later on.
Okay, because lots of people play Kog'Maw these days. It's an interesting pick. Anyway, so yeah, in that video leading up to Worlds, we had that documentary where you see Piglet like just cuddling with his mom, which is cool. Cuddle with your mom, be a mama's boy. That's fine. Obviously, they have a very strong relationship. The thing that was interesting to me is when Liquid went over to KR to like confirm and sign documents with Piglet. Like Piglet's mom was there. Piglet's mom. He had dinner with Piglet and his mom. Like obviously a very important part of his life. Never been away from home for that long. You know, always been close to his parents and his family. And like, not only can I imagine he'd be homesick, but like super distraught. Like huge culture shock. Not only is there culture shock, you literally cannot speak like any functional English outside of like League of Legends terms, which
Yeah.
if you want to have a conversation with a human being, let me tell you, being able to only say Baron, Dragon, Fight, and back are just not the vocabulary you want to have.
Yeah.
What kind of conversation are you having?
Massive change in what he eats too. Having good Korean barbecue at home, and then he comes here and is like, Chipotle. Let's make a video about you eating Chipotle for the first time.
An In-N-Out burger, the staples of American LCS cuisine.
Oh, good.
It's just like perfect situation for him to not be in a good spot, and
Mhm.
it's tough because like you got to think like as much as Steve as a manager wants to support him, like that's still a very like bullheaded team in general. Like
Yeah.
I don't know anything about Phoenix, but I know Quas is like I actually don't know Quas either. I know I Will Dominate has very strong opinions. Seems like he's calmed down a little bit, obviously since he's been unbanned and has been playing well, admittedly. X Special, the most notable passive aggressive personality of all time. I miss Game Cribs just because you got to see like
Game
that
Cribs was awesome for the
Game
Game
drama.
Cribs was
God.
hilarious.
It was so
special,
funny.
like Reggie making him cry and stuff. But now I get it. Like Reggie's all about confrontation, and X Special just avoids it so vehemently that like he must say like some of the snarkiest shit ever to people, just like avoiding conflict. Well, yeah, I guess if you want to keep throwing lane, you can do that.
Yeah, you could do
And the
it.
cameras start rolling, and Reginald's like, "What the fuck did you just say? What, mate?" And he's like, and then post that shit.
You're
on
just
Reddit.
making me like
Love
think
Reginald.
of these scrims where like people reach quits and like, well, I guess if you want to end the game faster.
That shit doesn't go on Reddit. It's Reginald.
I mean,
Yeah.
okay, I'm not trying to like spread anything. Like, I really don't know what goes on. There comes.
Yeah.
Well,
And-
you know, I kind of said this on an, I think 2-3 weeks ago when we were talking about Fnatic and whether or not they were going to keep doing well, and I said the same thing. Like, when you bring over Koreans, it's easy to make them feel comfortable when you're still doing well. But when things start going south, that's when you really need to like know how to deal with them and make them feel more comfortable. And I don't know how well they're able to do it in Team Liquid, but I'm not sure.
Well, it's
I
like
mean,
it's like the honeymoon stage of any relationship,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like
I mean-
all the Korean players, like everything's great, there's no problems, like we're winning games, we don't have to worry about communication issues. And then when everything goes to shit, like of course it's just gonna get so much worse
Yeah.
so quickly.
but at the same time, Team Liquid didn't have a honeymoon period in the season, at least.
They did for the first 2 weeks, and then Piglet came in and they lost.
Well, that's what I mean.
repeatedly.
Like the Team Liquid with Piglet, they never had its honeymoon period, unless. No. I mean, I guess Piglet was pretty depressed before, like, before he went back to Korea and came back for the season. But I heard they were doing okay in scrims at the time. I'm not sure. So, amusingly enough, that could have been the honeymoon period.
Yeah, and I just think like when you're, I don't know. For me, like Piglet got everyone on. They had that video where everyone dresses up like I don't even remember what.
They
Anyway,
dressed
they
up
all
as
dressed
Santa,
up.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and we're like trying to be cool with Piglet, and I'm like, that's a good effort and a good show of faith, but like, League is a really stressful game, and you need to be able to communicate like your emotional problems to people, right? And like have someone to talk to. And it seems to me like Piglet's not going to get that from his team. So where is he going to get it from? And if he's talking to his mom, like he's only going to get more homesick. So it just doesn't. It doesn't feel like a good situation for Piglet in any way. Not that you can't import a very good Korean AD carry. Like I think it can happen. There are some people with enough confidence and enough like gusto to do it. But Piglet's always like, as Emily said, Piglet's always been this like needier personality. Is like had a lot of codependence in his bot lane, a lot of codependence with his mother from what it looks like, and that just doesn't sound like a good setup when you just pull him away from all that and are like, here, like play with these people who can't understand you. I don't know. It just seems like a
I
bit.
think it's also the attitude that he came into the split with. Like, as Steven pointed out, like, he's very proud, and he came into NA thinking, oh, I'm just going to steamroll everyone. I'm going to put Doublelift in his place, like, blah, blah, blah. And, like, to be quite honest, that's not how going to a new team can work anymore. Because of the way the game has changed, because of the way that, like most teams, there are obviously exceptions, so I'm not saying across the board, but most teams, the way that the game itself has evolved, you can't just plug in someone who's really, really good and then have it work. You really can't. And, I mean, in a way, it's a good thing that you can't just have Piglet come over and start stomping people, because it means that your region as a whole is actually at a level where, that can't happen. Even in Brazil, I was surprised that Daydream and Emperor just didn't start like annihilating people. That's actually not what has happened, to my pleasant surprise. But it's I was like, whoa, Brazil, you're way better than I thought. But
just get it in wherever you can, Emily. Just throw us some PR references.
Got to. No, but it's hard, because that was, I feel like, from interviews, that was kind of the attitude that he had. He was like, yeah, I'm just going to go and I'm going to steamroll people and it's going to be great and we're going to be awesome and Curse isn't going to be in 4th place. Like, that's not a place for me.
And it's not like anyone told him any differently either. Like, that's Riot was like, Piglet, the legend from Korea, coming in. And like, Team Liquid, Steve was like, we're bringing in this ace player. It's going to be a star. Doublelift's like, oh shit, this is going to be terrifying. Like, laning against Piglet's going to be the most intense. Like, all of NA was like, we never learn. We never learn. We see the Koreans coming and we're like, we're done. We're screwed. It's over. Piglet, season 3 world champion. Oh man, he carried SKT on his back. Like, we'll build any narrative we want to justify bringing Koreans to like North America. And I think Piglet is not only prideful, but is like the victim of this ridiculously
hype.
Overblown. Yeah, this hype. You know what I mean? Like, there's just
Also,
I just want to say, it comes back to one massive issue. It's something that's actually, like, we've already talked about his emotional personality, but it's always something that he's had. And like, for instance, I remember I really started to realize this when SKT beat Samsung. I don't know how long ago this was, but they won, and you know what? Piglet was crying, and you're like, oh.
I was going to bring that up,
Yeah, because he cried about his own performance, and you start to see how he thinks about the game. He thinks himself as, like, the expectations he put himself, like how often does he play during the day in solo queue? Like, he plays so much. He wants to be the best. That's just something that he wants to do for himself. He comes in extremely emotional. So it's not a stretch that if he's doing poorly that he's going to be frustrated, and being easily frustrated is not. And I'm not saying he's flaming people, but like, if you're easily frustrated on a daily basis during scrims every day, like, that's
tension's kind
Jesus
of
Christ,
hard.
man. Not even that, but you just by being frustrated, just by having that attitude, you worsen the environment of your team, because people are just that's gonna bode on your thoughts. Like, well, I can't really say anything light noted, or else like I come off as not so much the bad guy, but like taking it too easy, and everybody's just. And it just feels like shit at that point. And it doesn't help that, like, it comes to a larger issue on Team Liquid. It doesn't help that each and every one of those players, not every single player, but that they have a history, or at least a general idea that their personality has been, like, either especially with being passive aggressive, or like you talk about dominate. I don't know about his personality. People say he's positive, but like, we obviously know his history. And so it comes down to, what do you want? What do you expect out of a team? Like, what do you want? Like, do you just put in the greatest players of all time, like in your region or something? Like, holy shit, look at this stacked team. We have Special, we have Piglet, we have Dominate. Now look at this, the greatest jungler in NA.
We have Uzi I. We have, sorry, let's
Raz, you know what you're describing? Raz, you know what you're describing right there? You're describing like
What?
CLG back in season 2. Look at all these star players. They're just so good in their role, and then they like, and then they stream their scrims, and it's like, fuck you, and like, this bullshit that never would have fucking happened.
Yeah. Well, and okay,
But
so
this is a lesson that they've never, like, that Team Liquid has never personally had to learn. And so now,
I feel like every team has to learn that lesson on their own. And guys, if you haven't seen it, Frostgren put out a great video on like the paper perfect roster, and that flawed concept that we all seem to be in love with. But like, I feel like no matter how many times it happens, it's one of those like history's like doomed to repeat itself kind of things. Because I feel like every organization gets this opportunity to like get all these star players through whatever reason, and they just are like, this will be the best. Like, they just can never see the flaws. They get way too excited about having all this talent, and they could just never worry about like the mental and emotional aspect of like team compatibility.
And it just showed in Team Liquid's choices. Like, oh, like now they're getting Keith McBrief, who's like a positive person. Like honestly, it reminded me of when TSM got Wild Turtle, and everyone was like, "Well, this guy's a troll. This guy's like never serious." But then, like, he not only was he one of like the best AD carry at the time. Like, you can make that debate now, but like back then he was on point, the best. but he had a person like he was a positive person and like affected the team in that manner. But like going back on the point with Team Liquid, like when they had that whole debate of like, oh man, who's Curse gonna bring? Is it gonna be Forgiven or is it gonna be Piglet? And now in my mind, I was like, they should probably go for Forgiven. Now the reason wasn't based on mechanics. At that time, I was like, Piglet's a better mechanical AD carry. That's just what I thought at that time. But I went for Forgiven for another reason entirely. I went because he speaks English. You don't have that problem with the communication. B, like you started to hear at the time that Forgiven was not actually a flamer that like Copenhagen Wolves just like tried to instill in people's minds, but like he was actually a positive, like not a positive, but he was realistic and he was like not like a complete shitter in that sense. So I was like, I'd rather have him just for the team aspect. But now he's coming off like that he's the greatest player of all time. And you're like, oh, okay, well, how about that?
And I think like for NA to get on the same level as, let's say, China or KR, or even EU, because even EU looks so much stronger right now, at least in my opinion. Like you have to have like good team relationships, and you need to communicate well as a team, and that's not going to happen if someone on your team is like just fucking your communication. You know what I mean? Like just being passive aggressive, just being negative all the time, or maybe not communicating at all. Like it's just, ugh. It's
Yeah.
so gross to me.
Yeah,
Like this.
pretty much. That's a good
But every team is learning that, and you know what? CLG has learned it. Now everybody's like, oh, I don't know when I want to get on the CLG hype train, but they've honestly learned it the hard way, where it kept kicking them in the ass. Like, holy shit, we hate our lives. Like, we're not happy people.
You know, people make fun of the power of friendship all the time, but like, I'd rather have that than the paper perfect roster with like the memer, the rager, the passive aggressive asshole. Like,
Yeah.
You've described our ranked fives team just perfectly. Just five on everything else, yes, other than our complete lack of mechanical skill. But
Good luck, guys.
wait, who was the rager in our ranked fives earlier? No
the
one.
silent, you know who it is. You know who it is. The
Raz?
silent. No, Raz is the. Are you kidding me?
I'm the memer, dude.
Well, I was memeing. Okay, we're getting off topic, but I was memeing
Yeah,
you.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll talk. Maybe we'll stream them later, and people can watch our
Oh,
ranked
God,
fives and
why?
decide for themselves what each of our horrible roles are in that situation. But let's talk about CLG. CLG playing TSM this week. It didn't look so
The
good as
most
a game.
hyped
Before we,
game.
oh my God.
Oh my god, that game.
Fucking
Before
heck.
we jump into the game, I think you brought up an excellent point about how CLG has learned their lesson. Like when CLG brought on Xsmithy and kept Link, people were like, "What the fuck is wrong with CLG? Like Xsmithy, are you kidding me?" Like this guy was like, "Yeah, he was good in season, I guess 3, but like he hasn't been ever good since then." But I think CLG finally valuing like personal relationships highly is what's going to be the reason that they come out if they continue to perform. Once again, like you mentioned, very hesitant to get on the hype train. I've been hurt too many times. But like the reason that I feel like they've done as well as they have so far isn't because they're miles better than the teams they've played against. It's because they have been, despite making some really poor decisions, they have been able to, in games where they have an advantage, like work together to keep that advantage going. So I don't know. I like CLG.
Maybe.
You're
Yeah, actually, you brought up a good
them,
point.
Daniel.
They did learn a lesson with their roster and who to bring into CLG. They did learn a lesson. I agree with that because in that game, I thought Xsmithy did pretty good. Much better than what people expect, at least. Zion, disgustingly good that game.
Mhm.
But obviously, okay, like I know Reddit like has done this like multiple times, but Link did choke that game hard, and double have choked that like 2 last team fights.
Yeah.
So it brings back to what I brought up like 2 weeks ago. When you put the pressure on, like real actual pressure over a match, you do start to see Link and double lift crack or throw or choke, whatever. Like
Yeah, and I don't know if it's like with Doublelift, it seems to me like in the past it's always been an attitude thing. Like he gets mad with the team, whereas with Link, it feels like he just doesn't do well under that much pressure and just like can't make good decisions.
and that's concerning. It's really concerning.
Well, and let's just look at the game from the beginning. Like
Okay.
so, right off the bat, pick bans for me.
Yeah.
I felt good about pick bans on both sides. I didn't for once in NA and EU both. I feel like the majority of the games I've watched have been horribly skewed in pick bans. Like one
yeah.
team
Yeah.
always does something stupid, or one team always does something really, really smart, right? And it's like there's always this huge disparity between like composition strength. But this game was like on paper, both teams look really strong. Like,
Even earlier that week, actually, CLG was a victim of that, where they had like a pretty solid pick ban, and then they just threw a Scion in the middle of a Jarvan comp, and you're like, that's pretty stupid, CLG. But then like like in this set there, it was super good. It was everything. You were going in to pick some bans. You were like, wow, is this what it feels like to watch?
Yeah, it was
Like,
it was a good
everything
it was a
caught
really
this
good
must
pick
be what it
ban,
feels like
yeah.
to watch Korea. Jeez.
Like
this
last
is-
year.
it's pick campaign.
Last year, what in China?
God.
No, China has horrible picks.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what have you heard of the team called World Elite?
Have you heard of the player Baka who never got his best champion ban away for like a few couple
Oh
hundred?
my God, the
Kings.
Xerath,
Still
the
doesn't
Xerath
get his
fans.
best
Oh my.
champion
That was
ban.
devastating.
All right, well,
Yeah.
back to CLG TSM. I'll say, early game CLG looked. I mean, both teams looked good in the early game, honestly.
CLG just looked way better though.
But yeah, look at like the Afro double lift duo lane looks fucking unstoppable. Obviously, they lane swapped. They went top against Dyrus' Scion, and like a long time ago, almost a month now, ago now, Skara said this whole thing about how he feels like support shouldn't roam, right? And I thought that was the dumbest shit I have ever heard ever. But CLG made it work. Like they got 2 kills on Dyrus in the laning phase, just like because Double Lift and Afro were that good and were that confident in their synergy and their ability to dive that Scion. Like it worked for them. As much as I knock it in general as like a theory for strategy, it worked for them and they executed it well. And like in that moment, in that like the first 10 minutes of that game, I was like, God damn CLG. Like I felt the love. I felt the love.
Something I have to say about CLG. They're in their own bubble when it comes to other NA teams. They do their own like shit, and so you have to like whenever you face them, you have to ban specifically for them, pick specifically for them, and even in their style when they say that, well, we don't want like we think supports roaming or bad. I've never heard of that, but like I'm just like I'm under the rock with a lot of things, but like they just. I think with that team specifically, they can do it. They can get away with that. And it just comes down to what Xmithy does for that team. Because holy shit, how he values Vision so fucking hard that it's just like, what happened to this team? Because he will get Sightstone on an unconventional jungler, kind of feels like Cortez, but except he actually has pressure. He will always get the Trailblazer, so he will always just like smite the toucans. I don't know what they're called.
Raptors.
Raptors, yeah.
He'll always smite the Raptors camp, so he'll always have the oracles. So he'll just run around, just be warding the place, warding heavily, and so they'll have like such great vision, such great vision denial as well, and he's just always roaming around the mid lane. So you can never he'll just like if a support comes to like the mid, he'll catch it out. So that's something that's CLG specific, and it's actually very strong, but could be abused later on when teams start to try to like focus down Xmithy himself. That's something to watch out for. But one thing that I've realized, like something they've improved highly. Like before, they were like everyone's like touting them for their vision control, but before their vision was it was so weird because they would just like spread out their vision across a massive line, which is really really inefficient and thin because teams could just like easily kill it, etc. But this time in this game against TSM specifically, they grouped up their vision, and so if they didn't see anybody, they can automatically assume that they're on the other side of the map, which should be the case. Like that's what you should always group up your vision. So that's something they've improved on. I think they're like honestly the top team in NA, other than the choking fact.
Yeah.
But
No, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I know a lot of people probably disagree with me on this, but I thought CLG looked a lot better and a lot more coordinated than TSM did. And I came out of that game like, obviously, yes, Daniel, I'm sure that you were catatonic on the floor by the end of it as a fan, but and I totally understand.
I was kind of relieved. I was like, oh, thank God, I don't have to put my faith in CLG. Like, I can wait one more
know
week
this
before I jump on the
feeling.
bandwagon. This feels like CLG.
living in Sky High for the first like 30
Yeah.
minutes of the game, and then starts foaming at the end of it, just like and
It's like doing hard drugs. That's what I compare to being a CLG fan too. You're just like feeling so good, and then at a certain point, you're just like you crash and you crash hard, and there's just nothing worse. And then you watch them again, and it's CLG hard drugs. Tell your
Yeah.
parents, kids.
Nice.
CLG.
Yeah, I
I'm
was
on that
watching with
hard
my
CLG.
friend.
I know.
I was watching with my friends. I was just like, "Oh my god,
I
CLG looks so good. CLG looks so good. CLG looks so good." Like TSM's not reacting to vision properly, and then she's just like, "Don't worry, they'll throw." And I'm like, "Maybe, just maybe." And then it happened, and then Link went over that wall and ulted
It's just-
himself, and I was just like, "It's here. TSM's gonna win." There's the crack.
No.
Thorin had
No.
this, like
Moment.
the Thorin tweet that made it for me, and this was the only reason I could like enjoy the game overall. Was he's like, they said he couldn't do it. They said there was no way to throw the game, but Link proved them wrong. It's just so.
What
perfect.
annoyed me throughout the entire set was how, like, the casters were like, "Oh, this is such a close game. Oh, look at this set. Oh, they're neck and neck. Look at the goal lead." All the while, CLG was like amassing a 4-dragon like. They
Four
were
dragons,
destroying TSM and dragons. They almost had 5th dragon. Are you kidding me? And I was like, casters, come on now. Please,
not
are
a
you paying
close
attention
game.
to the dragon? And like little did I know, they were just like they were validated by CLG just throwing the fucking game. Just like
I see, everybody knows now. You can just rely on that, and that's a huge issue. Like,
There's-
no, go ahead,
Oh,
go ahead,
no.
Emily. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, like, one thing I want to bring up going into this discussion of CLG's choking is on the other side, and I know TSM themselves brought it up in TSM Legends, and then additionally, I know Thorin brought it up in a video that he did following the
Bjergsen.
set. But, like, the difference between, like, playing as a unit of 5 versus having the attention focused on one player, which is Bjergsen for TSM.
Yeah.
And the fact that internationally, again, as we were talking about, you cannot compete with a structure like
Hey,
that unless you're, Starhome World Club,
Hold
apparently.
on. Apparently the stream is
But
black right
like
now.
that's
So let me restart it.
yeah.
Hey, welcome back. Hopefully, stream a little bit of internet errors here, a little bit of connection issues from hosting the stream. We were just talking about CLG, the CLG legacy, how we expect CLG to perform in the future. Obviously, their game versus TSM, and the greater problems it might indicate. Let's hope not, though. Emily, you were just talking about CLG internationally.
well, like the conversation where it was drifting to is kind of what to expect from both of these teams going forward and CLG's kind of choking issues. But one thing that I just want to bring up in relief to that is the idea of how these two teams are structured. Like we discussed before, CLG has kind of figured out, okay, we have a team with actual chemistry, and then look what you can do with it. And I was actually honestly genuinely impressed with what they did in the first part of that game, in the early game. The difference being that TSM is, basically relying on Bjergsen to carry them. And I know that a lot of people disagree with that or get upset when they hear that. It's something really similar to like Starhole Royal Club, where it's not necessarily something that can be indicated even by like gold. Oh my gosh, like who gets the most gold or whatever, where the actual resources are being funneled, but like what people are doing, like who are they peeling for? How are the team fights actually working? Who are you expecting to dictate the tempo of the game? Who are you expecting to carry the game eventually for you? If TSM doesn't get more strategically diverse, they will definitely have issues going forward if they want to do well on an international stage.
Yeah, TSM will have to work on their strategical improvements. Like that team is, they've always been a really strong team fighting team. Like every single time they go in, it's like, wow, we have like such an amazing team fight. They can maneuver well. It could be maybe possibly kind of world class, but then they always find themselves in these odd deficits because their early games is not good. It isn't on a world level. It's just teams will walk all over them. So that's something they have to work
But
on.
one thing I want to say is that the way that CLG tilts and loses focus in the mid game implies to me that they stand no chance in a best of X series,
Yes.
whatever that is, 3 or 5, if they don't win game 1, right? If they don't win, I don't think we will ever see in international play or even in local play in best of X games a CLG comeback. Like we have in the past once or twice, admittedly, but I just can't like against the way
A
the
good
way
team,
the
yeah.
rosters are stacked this season and how there's still skill gaps. CLG and TSM I think are doing very well. Cloud9 obviously suffering a little bit, but maybe able to pull ahead again. Like those teams are clearly at the front, right? And everyone else is kind of in the middle. And you've got some teams that are clearly bad, but it's much closer this season than it was last season. And I feel like I just it's hard for me to imagine CLG having good placing and being able to make it to Worlds. I think the group stage format for Worlds would do wonders for them if they make it that far. But it's just I can't imagine them qualifying if they have to play best of X series, at least with the set of problems that they have right now.
Yeah, like the way I see CLG and TSM is like, so TSM, like you guys haven't kind of already said, they're very straightforward in how they win games. Bjergsen kind of carries, like even if they don't always intend for it, like he does, right? So they're kind of like this like heavy broadsword. It's very stylistic, one dimensional how you fight other teams, right? You get Bjergsen strong and then you swing sword and you break through the arm or whatever. And CLG is very flexible. I think they're tactically they're good. Strategically they can they can build different kind of swords, but they're flimsy. They're not made of strong metal. Link, if they choke, they're gone, right? So I don't know. I was just thinking like, what if you just have like Link play scrims under pressure? Like I don't know. You like every time Link chokes or something.
Oh, the gun to his head.
Like every time he chokes or something, you delete an anime off his computer, or you craft away one of his Hearthstone cards. Like,
But does that make more? Does that just increase the pressure and make his performance worse though? Like, don't you need to find a way to like? Well, I guess it's just positive versus negative influence. I'm generally
But
a fan of
you can't have
positive
false
or
pressure,
positive
though.
reinforcement.
if you have false pressure
Yeah,
in any
that's-
way, though, then he's not gonna take it seriously. And it won't be in the form of pressure of like his teammates or people flaming him. It'll be like something superficial like losing a Hearthstone card, but he still won't want that to happen. I don't know, some kind of something like that. You don't actually have to do that.
Yeah.
His Hearthstone card.
He just shouldn't be playing Hearthstone at all. Quite frankly, he should be focused on.
Well, yeah.
I don't know. I think if someone's not performing, don't let them play games in queue. All right, guys, welcome back. Getting DDoSed for our hatred or love for CLG. I don't know. Anyway, more technical problems. Sorry about that. We're back. We're going to finish up our topic with NA shortly here. We're mostly talking about CLG this week. Sorry if we didn't get to your favorite team. It's mostly because they're just doing the same shit. So if they get interesting, we'll talk about them. Sorry, boys. CLG, always interesting, though. We were just talking about, I don't even remember what. I've got Steven as Vash the Stampede on my
Nugs
on
the
my
Stampede,
screen.
thank you very much.
Nugs the Stampede.
Stampede.
So, what else do we want to say about CLG before we move on to Europe?
That's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it. Okay, so for those of you guys who missed it, we're afraid that they're never going to win best of threes. We're sad that they performed as poorly as they did. We hope they don't throw anymore. Love, hate CLG. All right, EU. So the big thing about EU, we're going to talk a lot about the top teams this week. Once again, not so much about the middle teams. Mostly just because this is the huge narrative coming into this week is going to be SK and Fnatic. So right off the bat, we talked a lot about SK last week, about how strong they are as a team, how good they look. Honestly, how much better they look than the rest of EU. I think this week just proved it anymore. Still undefeated, looking strong as always. Their games that are coming up against Fnatic in the coming week. Who's going to come out on top in these games? Does Fnatic even have a chance?
Maybe. I think Fnatic, they've come to a point where Fnatic's like 100% predictable. They need to work on different strategies. And at the same time, you can just ban out Reignover's champions, because if you do, he comes off with a really not a bad champion. Olaf is great, but he doesn't look good on it at all. And you hit him hard, and he will crumble. That will probably change later on when the team starts to solidify a better plan, I guess. But that's just the state of Fnatic, in which Fnatic will probably still be the second best team, but in EU, that's not saying that much, which is really rough to say.
Yeah. Well, here's the
Yeah.
thing, is that you're right, that they play this one style. They're very reliant on it. And Yellow Star has gone on the record saying he's very determined to improve the team and diversify their strategy. And quite frankly, like I don't blame them for continuously running it. It obviously works very well for them. But they need more. Like realistically,
Yeah.
once again, we've talked about
Yeah.
Worlds probably way too much for how early in the season it is. But internationally, if we get to see Fnatic compete internationally that's coming up, like they're gonna have to do something because it's gonna take an analyst 3 VODs of any three Fnatic games to figure out how they work because there's nothing else other than that one strategy. And being linear like that means every pick ban you have is hell. Like, is just a freaking nightmare because if teams know what you're going to try to do, it's so easy to shut that down. It's so easy to pick that away from you. And it's like, I don't even care if teams are worse at the strategy than Fnatic. If they take it away from Fnatic, I guarantee they'll beat them just because Fnatic looks so weak in any other way.
Yeah.
Mm.
I was gonna say that's mainly the narrative for me going in. Like, can Fnatic actually show? Like, to be honest, the way SK is looking, I would think that Fnatic will likely lose regardless. To be honest, just because of how strong that team looks right now. But I would like to see a close match where Fnatic does something different than what they've shown for the entire split.
And honestly, they can go with the good old one-trick warhorse that like a Zubu Blaze put on, like being the best at a certain, not so much of a strategy, but like a team comp kind of, I guess a strategy. It's not too bad. It has its problems, but if they can perfect it, obviously they're gonna diversify themselves. They understand their own problems, but it's not too bad. Hopefully the team figures itself out. Just kind of like how LM is figuring itself out, but that region on the whole is interesting.
The thing I will say, like before when we make that a Zubu Blaze comparison or the CJ Blaze comparison, is that like the difference is that they did something totally new. Like they sixth manned in a way that like no other team had done in that region previously, using it very well. And obviously the counter that came on later was like super assassin based pick comps where they would just straight up like, oh, you're gonna try to freeze lane, I'm just gonna kill you. Like I'm just gonna take the advantage, the small advantage that you gave me and murder you with it. And like teams don't need that level of innovation to beat out the comp that Fnatic is relying on because this is a comp we see worldwide, right? Like this is like what they do and the way that they play isn't especially unique. And I would imagine that like of course SK is going to be prepared for it. They've shown that they're on top of the ball in that way. And Elements may be a little bit slow to the punch, but like they will figure it out shortly too, as will the rest of EU. So I don't know. I'm concerned that if they don't diversify within the coming weeks that their place at the top of EU isn't even guaranteed anymore.
That's true.
I wouldn't be. Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I wouldn't be as hasty to say that only because a lot of EU teams and Elements is one in particular that I kind of see as representative of this kind of play style. SK and Fnatic aside, one of the reasons why I think Fnatic looked so good early on is because that specific, slightly more aggressive play style that they were playing, it matches up really well against a more passive play style. So like one of the reasons why Fnatic was doing so well is not simply because they're executing well. Like, to be honest, there's still some holes in their actual execution of the compositions they're trying to run. But the reason is that it's actually a really good matchup for them against more passive teams. So they can afford to make those mistakes because they're not getting punished for them. However, that's why I think that it's a bad matchup for SK because I do believe that SK will punish them for those mistakes, even if they end up running a composition that they want to.
And I want to also state that as much as I think that EU at the moment is not competitive, it will be extremely competitive as the time goes on. So like come playoffs, like Fnatic's position is not guaranteed anymore. Like it won't be, especially going into summer, because then you have like, of course, everyone's talking about Rocket that was expected to be the super team, but like they need to figure their shit out, and I think they are. They're getting to it, and then you have Elements that like they got Kevin, and sure he won't be the solution to their problems, like he won't be, but like they will also start figuring it out very slowly, depending on whatever coaching staff that team has. And you have Gambit that honestly they didn't have internet for like the first how many weeks like into the
First two
split, and
weeks,
you're
I
like,
think.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
was like you don't have internet, you can't scrim, like they're just getting their gaming house, and you're like, okay, well
And
they were the IEM champions, so
my I love me some Unicorns of Love. Like
mhm.
they're pretty bad at pick ban phase. They're pretty bad at mid game, but the mechanical skill on those players and the fact that their pick bans have slowly been getting better, like I think you're right. I think EU is going to be incredibly competitive. I think
Mhm.
kind of in the same way that
H2K.
NA is. H2K even is
I
stepping their
really
game up.
loved H2K.
I
I
think
got
H2K will be probably the third best,
Yeah,
maybe
like
in the
I
region.
really, really
I-
like
They're
them.
looking a lot
I'm not
stronger.
just,
than
I'm
Ravens.
not just
say
saying that
fourth or
because
fifth.
Ryu's on the team. Okay.
The reason why I say the third best is because, of course, they're obviously just figuring everything out. But like, they have that roster has so much potential. And I say potential because they've actually proven that they can like become better. Like they're getting better. They're constantly learning. They have Adwamna, who is the best like top laner in the region. They have Ryu, and everybody knows Ryu. He like his like the name speaks for itself. And then their bottom line is like, shwang wang wang. But like they have a support. They have Kasing now, and Kasing is already like immediately the game one. He proves himself to be like the most like landing hook after hook, and that yeah, like all right. So
Good.
I think the Kasing choice was excellent. I thought Kasing
mm,
played fantastically. He clearly works very well with the team, and he also pushes the team to be more aggressive with the way that he roams around the map, which at first I was like skeptical about.
mm,
But assuming that he can play that same way when he doesn't have Thresh, you know what I mean? Like he's good. He's really good. I was H2K did really well this week. I'm hesitant to put them in third. I will say almost a guaranteedly fourth or fifth, but they have stepped it up, and if they can keep the performance that we saw this week going, they're going to be doing very well as they move forward. So,
mhm, yeah.
moving on, the big piece of news, you touched on it really lightly. Kevin has replaced Wicked officially in the top lane for Elements.
Mhm.
We harped on Wicked a lot last week about his how to phrase it. So I
Aggressiveness. And,
aggressive engages. I think
Yeah.
is what we were talking about. The play
Item
style,
selection.
God.
item selection, play style mismatch.
yeah.
Um, Not official, says DeRaven. Nilu says not official. Okay, so I guess this is a rumor. We'll talk about it anyway, though, since we're already here.
Yeah, rumors.
So Kevin, maybe the new top laner. Anyway, Wicked no longer the top laner, I guess is the bigger piece of news.
At the very least, we can talk about like how Wicked is like just like compare it, and if he is like if you can remove him for another player, especially like of course like Kevin.
Well,
So, mhm.
So here's the thing. We finally agreed after John like chewed me out for calling Wicked a baddie last week. That Wicked is good, but that his play style and the way he plays the game does not at all match Froggen or the rest of the players on the team in general. Wicked is far too aggressive in the engages that he makes. Not that they're wrong because his team doesn't follow up on them, which is makes them wrong. You know what I mean? Like even if it's the right choice to engage in that situation, if his team doesn't follow up, it's a shitty decision. And so it's interesting to me that this is the way they've approached their problems. Wicked, obviously a veteran, obviously a very loved player, but I'm curious to see if Kevin's going to be doing any better. How do we feel about Kevin in general? Like, what is obviously an interesting player on his time on Millennium? I mean, I didn't see Kevin coming, honestly. Kevin was, I don't know who else they'd grab, but Kevin is an odd choice to me.
What do you think?
Not
It's
at
been
all.
a while
Mismatch.
since I've seen Kevin play, so I don't know how much better or worse he is than before.
Mm-hmm.
He's solid, I'll say that.
Yeah,
he's
he's-
consistent.
Pretty. I guess he's consistent.
Yeah.
I have bad memories of him. I have bad memories.
Yeah.
of him.
Okay.
'Cause-
My
'cause,
memory's
like-
really fuzzy on Kevin, so I'm not
Okay.
the best.
Okay, everybody like already like hearing the talk of Kevin. Everyone's like, well, he's definitely an upgrade for that team, and I'm like, I remember when this guy was getting shit on the daily on social media because like as well as he was a very consistent player, very consistent, and then he goes into playoffs, and he starts playing Aatrox.
Oh my
And
god! I remember.
There
now.
we go. Here comes the memories. Because
Oh.
Aatrox is not a bad champion, but it's a Freddy specific champion because you have to be good on it. Freddy worked on that champion and he was damn good on it. Kevin played that champion. got shit on every lane matchup, became the sole reason why Millennium lost their games, and was like, all right, so please stop it, please, just please Millennium ban Aatrox for yourselves. Like,
Oh yeah, the classic ban champions away so your friends can't play them. Oh, you want to go jungle? Oh, we're gonna ban away your Shaco and your Nidalee. Like you're playing J4, deal with it. Like it's in the same vein.
It's kind of like when we play League and I'm like, Raz, you can't play Udyr.
So you just ban it. See, that's why bans are important. You make sure your friends don't play that champion they like to troll with.
Yeah.
And I think you're right about Aatrox in general. I think as far as champions go, Aatrox comparative to other champions is just weaker right now, and was weaker then than a lot of top laners. But because of like mechanical proficiency, you can bust it out. Maybe he'll play more. You know, maybe Kevin will bust it out more. But I think that with the level of infrastructure that we have this year, and with his track record on Aatrox,
I would hope they would not.
I would really sincerely hope that no one is gonna give him Aatrox.
Because I
Here's
feel
the
like
thing.
whenever we talk about, oh yeah, you go for it.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, it depends on what Elements even wants to do as a team, and like, who do they want to carry that team? If it's gonna be Rekkles and Froggen, then really all they need him to do is not, you know, like take a poop in lane, and then it'll be fine, right? Like I guess that's what. I feel like Wicked sometimes is a liability in top because of champion pool, and then also because of the like you said, the play style mismatch. I don't have a huge problem with Kevin, although I actually prefer Wicked in general as a player, like myself. I think like if you have both those players side by side, I'd say Wicked's probably a better player. But in terms of Kevin on Elements, if he is solid in lane, like basically if he doesn't lose too badly, the team should be able to work around that. I don't know. That's just like my like overview of the situation. Because like on Elements, who are the carries on that team? Like why did they go get Rekkles?
You know what pisses me off is that we're even having this discussion, because I feel like this is such a false discussion about what's wrong with Elements, and even and the fact that Elements is forcing this discussion, because I feel like they're gonna end up probably making this move, is like, do you understand the problem of your own team? Do you like you have to start wondering what their infrastructure is like on that team, because every single time they make a move, it's like they don't understand. You don't like changing, like putting Nif on that team. I was like, yeah, you don't understand. That was initially when they first made the team. I was like, okay, that's not a good choice. And then I'm just talking about solely as a. There were other, like, I think who was the choice? It was N-rated or Nif initially, right? I think that was
I think those were the two choices.
Yeah,
and I was like, you need some strategy in your games, but like that was way back, and you're like, okay, whatever. And then they take tabs out for Rekkles, and I was like, that's not what's wrong with that team. And like, not only was it not wrong, but it was a downgrade, because as like they had different styles. I can understand that, but like his style was set, like Tabs' style was the most like malleable. I don't even know if that's correct. Like you can mold it into anything. You can change him based on adaptable.
And to be
you
fair,
can change it to everything. Yeah.
In that situation, I think there was some interpersonal and communication issues. Like he obviously wasn't too big of a fan of the way team structure worked out, and I've heard from a couple people who've talked to him or talked to his friends that like he wasn't happy on the team in that team structure. But at the same time, I mean, you're right. Like there is something to be said for finding a player who's going to fit well into your team. And we've pretty much been talking about this the whole show in general. Is like it's more important to have that player that's going to fit with your roster than to have that player who has that carry potential. At least for most teams. Like sometimes you do just need a hard carry. Like you do need someone who can just solo carry your team. But like most of the time, at least in this day and age of League of Legends, where pretty much every player who makes it to the professional scene is mechanically skilled enough to like not lose or not throw lane, you know, like it seems to me like you always are going to want to have a player who's going to function better in team fights, who's going to communicate better with the team, who's going to be able to like, because imagine like as the meta shifts and like if AD carries are like shifted to a different role, you know what I mean? Like Rekkles is going to be fucking useless. Like he is good at killing people. He is good at farming, and like he is not an adaptable player as far as I can tell. He does his thing.
And
that's-
with every team, it's like they have to understand their own faults. They have to understand their own drawbacks. And it seems like Elements has never understood their own drawbacks. Now they're replacing Wicked for uh I already
Kevin.
forgot his name, Kevin. And it's like, was that ever
His
the
player
problem?
name is.
No.
It's actually, yeah. I was like, but was that ever the problem? Sure, Wicked made horrible decisions and builds. Everyone made fun of him. It was like, oh, he's the scapegoat now because like he built this way, not that way. He sometimes engaged, but was that the right decision? And then you suddenly go, wait a minute. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's their decision making. Maybe the problem with the team is that yeah, even like, thank you, Riot, for showcasing like Elements' problems through like their comms and like actually showing that they never listen to each other in whatever decision they're making. And I don't know, it was in one set or something. I forget. It was in one game. Don't remember the game exactly, but they showed it up there, and it's like it just goes to show the problem with Elements is that they don't have the strategy in their games. Like you can see it through how they play. B, it just feels like they're not structured. They don't have the solid shot calling. Maybe one of them is the shot caller, but it's not showing. Like they need to have a better structure. I don't know who their coach is. I don't know who their analysts are. Like what's going on here? Like that's the real problem. They need to figure out like before the game starts, how do we want to play the game before they actually get into the rift? Because I don't see that.
Well, and the thing is like I have never. So I'm gonna describe Elements as like the Reddit team. That's what it feels like to me. It feels like every time they see a problem, they're like, "Oh shit, Wicked's the problem." Like they jump on it. Like they never look deeper. They always like they always
Get him!
see a problem and they're like, "Well, fuck this guy. Let's like take him off. He's clearly the problem." Like they never look any deeper. And it feels like that lack of self-awareness, like you said. Well, yeah, I mean, they're just
Get
like
him, boys!
Good. No, it's so true. Like it's so true.
like if Reddit could
Blew
make
my mind
roster
right now.
swaps based on like what was on the front page, like that team is Elements. Like that is
like-
the team of Elements.
They're like having a discussion, man. I don't know what's wrong with their team. Well, let's look on Reddit, all right? And then they just see like #1, Wicked's building Rabadons on on Rumble. Everyone just like turns to Rick and just like get the fuck out of this door. Get out.
Like the answer is never like look deeper into the team, figure out like why this is. And they never. Yeah, that's like it's just so frustrating because you're right. That no one ever looks past this like idea that. Oh, McKay, so why would he decide to build that item? Like, who on the team said that was okay? And they're like, well, no one said that okay. So obviously, Wicked's
So
fault.
were you paying attention?
Yeah, like,
What if the cons is like, hey guys, can I build the Rabadons? Yeah, sure, go for it.
yeah, why not? You know, just
And they lose the game. Why did you build Rabadons? You told me it was okay too.
You told me it was okay.
Or like the rest of the team's just not paying attention, and then suddenly they look up. They're like, "Wait, where did that come from?" Which speaks to a whole other problem in terms of not paying attention to each other.
I think this is just like a thing for older players in EU. Like the older you get, the more like trolly items you build. Like Darien, you know, before he kind of like drops out of the scene. Just like the amount of trolling you did, just like went through the fucking roof. Maybe like Wicked knew like that his time was coming, and he's just like, "Fuck it, like death cap, let's do it." If I'm going out, I'm going out like a boss.
Well, yeah, but like like item builds, that's something you could definitely discuss. I remember with Gambit, like their mantra or something was like, you have to buy. It doesn't matter what item you buy, just like use the gold or something. Like that's just like the basics that they had. So when they had a lead, you just see like randomly Darien building like AP on whatever Renekton or something, and they're like, okay, so they're just making a joke out of this. So you'd see random Genja builds, and you just have to have that discussion on your team. And, you know, Elements, I don't feel like they ever have that discussion. You know why? Because I feel like their infrastructure is shit. I don't know.
I think it's the same thing for their pick bans too.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's just kind of like, hey guys, what champion is good?
Well, okay, and Monte Cristo like touched on this the other night when they had like Nif on, and he's like, so why do you keep first picking Graves? and he's like trying so hard not to shit talk his team or like trying to find.
I don't know.
Like that's honestly how I feel about the pick ban phase. It's just kind of like, who's available, who's good, who's OP. Graves is OP. We pick Graves.
Like, I don't know.
Is that the conversation Korean teams have? Like Xerath is OP.
No, that's the conversation. Like, oh my
You
god.
actually
That's the
sit
conversation
down and you
Snake
think
has. It's
about
like-
it and you write out, okay, what are we going to do with this team composition? What do we want to go into pick bans? Even Brazilian teams do that. Like, Like, what are you doing?
I don't know. Maybe
You're
the
not
memes have hit him
planning
too
out
hard.
pick bands ahead of the game. Like,
Yeah.
I don't
God.
know if that's what's happening, but if it is, like, that is really, really
No,
bad.
because Chip's focused on stage.
I don't know. Maybe it's
telling
also
you-
because like
Is he just
But that
like
coach has to be
yelling
like, well,
random things? Like,
what do you think, guys? Did you all do your homework? Did you do your research for the team? What do you want to pick? And then like, Reckless is like, I really want to play Graves, and then he's like, okay, team, how do you guys feel about that? Like maybe Graves,
maybe
he's
we
good.
should leverage
Someone
the
mentioned their
first
coaches from
spot
W. He's
in a
like,
flex to get something else. Like, I'm sorry, I am incredibly unqualified to be an analyst, and even I know that.
I don't know. Maybe it's just because the Koreans haven't solidified their pick bands yet, and people are just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know who to copy.
all right.
Copy no Faye, people. Copy.
Yeah, copy
no
no
Faye.
Faye.
I am telling you, for many reasons that I will talk about later. No Faye.
Okay.
We have shat on just Elements as a team, as an organization for a while now. Let's
I
pretend.
didn't get to use my console joke.
Oh man, there's so
Oh.
many.
No, it's really not necessary.
Okay.
All right. Let's pretend that this. What will this do? I guess that's the way that I phrase it. What will this move do before we move on to other regions? What
Oh, God.
You
Will
mean the
this,
Kevin
like-
thing?
will this fix some of the problems that they have
No.
with their current set of problems?
No.
Okay.
It
I
might
don't know, I
fix
feel
their
like I always
problems
have
for
these
1
rants.
week.
Like
I-
EU needs to step up, man. EU needs to step up. You have all these like teams that need to actually just shovel shit into Elements' face and actually play well. Because Elements is winning games, and you're like, you shouldn't be winning games at all. You shouldn't to these teams.
EU needs to
based
take
on-
turns like giving Elements swirlies. Just shove them into the toilet and make them feel bad for what they do.
until they finally it clicks in their
High
mind. It's
pacing.
And they're like, guys, we're sorry. We finally figured it out. We'll get rid of Reckless and bring in someone else. We promise. Like, you don't get it. Please, Elements, please.
What does Reddit say, Daniel?
This is like I feel like everyone in the world is speaking a different language than what Elements is speaking, and we're like, Elements, this is what you need to do, and they like kind of half understand what you're saying and just like misinterpret it a little bit and just like go do something else. I don't know. Elements.
And it feels kind of like sad that we're talking about this team so often. And like you look at the rest of the teams and you see MIM and please no, I don't wake me up from this nightmare.
And then, yeah, exactly. It's like you look at these top
Comparatively,
teams, you
they-
point out
they
the
pay
problems.
their players and don't threaten to like take their houses away, right? Like, so I guess they're doing something right in the sense that they're not hostiling like or fostering the most hostile work environment I've ever seen ever.
Yeah.
So they're $5,000 up on MYM, right? Because of their great infrastructure. Like
$5,000 up.
they're $5,000 up on them. Like, good job, boys.
We talk about infrastructure and then we have another we have another level of infrastructure in that scene. Literally de-infrastructure. They're taking away the houses. You're like, oh shit. Okay.
Use another K.
Alright.
All right, let's. Oh my God, this discussion. I just want to like. I just can't say enough shit. Like, there's just so many things to say about. Well, let's hope they figure it out.
Let's wash our hands of this and move on.
And now
Let's go
we're
to
done.
greener pastures.
China.
China.
Is this greener?
Oh, China!
Let's go to smoggy, questionable
Yeah.
forms of morality pastures, I guess, in general. Is just my thing. Not in this week though. No scandal. All right. First off, the first thing that we want to talk about this week, obviously, as always, every week in LPL, there's a ton of shit going on. GAMT versus King. King in general is going to be a big topic of discussion this week. King.
Yeah.
I can see the face palming.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
okay,
love.
okay, okay.
I watched King going into this season, and I was like, yes, this team is awesome.
We all
Like,
did.
oh,
We all did. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so mad.
Lucky came on and psyched us up for King. Kelsey came on and was like, King might not be the best, but they're going to be good. Like, Raz came on and was like, King. King is very...
You watch Demacia Cup, and they're like, you're like, King, okay, like, I can get behind this team.
I talk about context so much, and it sucks because whenever you talk about context, people won't share the same opinion. Like because you look at King's history. I feel like I talk about this so much, but it just like I can never not talk about this because it's like you have to realize it's like holy shit, King was like the number one team in China at a time. Well, I mean, China must have been like pretty shitty through the preseason, and you're like, wait a minute, King like 2-0'd Starhorn Royal Club going in like literally just like weeks before World Championships. What happened to this team? And I was just like talking this team up before week one of LPL, talking them up, being like, "Wow, this team, they understand the meta. Like they're always adapting." And then you find out that like in this meta, they just never adapt. They couldn't adapt. They couldn't. And you're like, "Well, what? Why can't they adapt?" And I talked about it earlier, like either last week or something, about how like Flan. No. God, it's different teams. Sky couldn't
Yeah, we're
play. Couldn't play meta champions. Like he couldn't play Rumble. He couldn't play Gnar. He couldn't like he plays Lissandra. Like we saw his Lissandra and it was pretty good during the preseason. So I'm not sure why he didn't pick that up. But like he couldn't play Rumble and he never actually like you look back at his like past all of his LSPL games, not a single Rumble game in sight. He probably I heard that he played it like during the preseason, but I don't remember it. And it was like from what I hear it was pretty bad too. So like Rumble is a big thing. Like and finally guess what? He pulls it out like during LGD's game like 2 weeks ago. And he actually did really well. And you're like, wow, this team is starting to adapt. Maybe they might be like one of the best teams. Holy shit, like oh they're coming back. And then you go into the next and then you go into this week, which was so weighed so heavily because they had a 3 week
They had three
3 game
matches.
set. Yeah, matches and the first one was OMG. And I think the second one was Gamti, and the last one was against IG. So it really did affect their rankings and like power rankings, and just like what you saw from them. And damn, man, it was depressing to watch. Like with especially with like the OMG game, because we can talk about Gamti and how Gamti 2-0'd King. Like we could talk about that, but like in one of OMG's sets, they literally just like snowballed and just got destroyed in the 20-minute mark. And you're like, why is this happening? Why are they losing? And then they go into against Gamti and they just get demolished. And you're like, what is going on with this team? Like, what the hell? I thought they were bouncing back up. And then you realize, like, you look at picks and bans, and then like that's basically where the games were. They played like MLXG played Nidalee, which is like the first time you see him
Oh,
playing, and of course
God.
like yeah, Nidalee is like his.
Oh God, it's
Yeah,
not
exactly,
a
right?
champion. Yeah,
Yeah, we
it's
saw that.
not. Like they should. That is a champion that King should be like ban the Nidalee because we don't want fucking. Like, Jesus, play it.
It was so bad. It was like
Yeah.
actually mind-boggling. Like not only you could talk about a bad Nidalee player like missing spears, but he stepped it up, man. He stepped on the plate. He pounced into team fights that he had no business pouncing into.
Yeah.
Like he just got blown up at every stage of the game. And then you saw Sky play Gnar. And that's the thing. Like they were just experimenting picks, and I feel like maybe they played it during the like scrims, but like Sky was playing Gnar, and you're like, holy shit, they're trying to adapt into this meta. And then he played so poorly on Gnar, his engages, like his positioning, it was just like not, and his like
It was tough to watch.
Okay, this is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
His rage management, like the rage bar management, was just abysmal. And that's something like you see Cola doing so well because Cola plays that champion so often. He would wait until he kind of just stack it up to like the 95 like percent mark, and he would just wait until a perfect time. He would hit a minion and he'd just jump in. But like Sky didn't do that. Like it was embarrassing. But that's just King. And so they lose 2-0 to Gamti. They lose, I mean, 0-2 to Gamti. They lose 0-2 to like OMG in a pretty embarrassing set. And they go up against IG and actually started playing their real champions. Like you saw Sky just go back. She just say, "Fuck it, I can't play those champions anymore. I'm just gonna go back to Aurelia." And they played an exceptional match and they won. Like they tied it actually, 1-1. But it's not looking good for King. It isn't, and I think it's largely in part that they're still like experimenting picks. And I think if they just go back to their old playstyle, their old champion picks, they could just be like a perfectly fine team.
I mean, by old champion picks, do you mean like picking J4 and Lee Sin away every game? Because
Oh, geez,
like
I don't want that. I don't mean
no,
like that.
I mean
Yeah.
You're talking like when you talk about going back to old picks, you're talking about going back to being innovative in the meta, like because that's what they were good at. They like or not necessarily innovative. They kept up very well with the meta, right? Like that was always their strength, and
They
that's why we liked them.
adapted.
And then they're not keeping up anymore, and now they're like trying things, but they're trying things that are like already meta and are already being executed. So it feels like they're
Yeah.
behind the curve, and they've continued being behind this curve the entire season. Like obviously they showed a spark of brilliance against LGD. Everyone was on the King goddamn hype train after those matches, right? Because they looked so good, and then they go right back to just nothing. And it feels to me like this is not going to be King's split, right? Like
Yeah.
King can when they have the time and they have some like a small off season, whatever that size is, they'll have time to catch up. But I feel like now that they're behind, they're never going to catch up this season. At least that's how it feels to me.
I think they just need to accept that they can't play these champions, and they need to go back to. When I mean go back to their old picks, I just mean like Lissandra, like or Aurelia. Just prioritize Aurelia, or prioritize like whatever old champion you. Not Gragas. Gragas is a shitter. But like, but like prioritize champions he knows how to play, and kind of ignore where the meta is going, because Aurelia works pretty well against Gnar, and so. And then you go like Assassin's doing all right. He's doing okay. And then you go to MLXG, and yeah, his picks are kind of off, obviously, because now he used to just play like Lee Sin, Elise, and then you're like, wow, Elise is bad. Lee Sin is pretty bad at this moment. Probably the lowest point that Lee Sin has been. And so now MLXG is like falling off simply because his pocket, like his picks that he just like played often, are just not there anymore.
Well, and
Like,
I feel like even like you can still do a lot of work with Lee Sin. Lee Sin is obviously still a very powerful character, just like based on what he can do. But even then, obviously, I still think you're right. I still think he's the weakest he's ever been. I would not say he's less than a top tier jungler at this stage, but he's not J4. You know what I mean? And he's not Nidalee right now. Obviously, Nidalee very, very, very powerful in the early to mid game, and he's not Vi either. You know what I mean? Like there's junglers who do what he does more reliably in the mid to late game. And I think that's just going to be a huge thing, because I think if he doesn't have like huge impact in the first 10 minutes of the game, like that pick is just going to be awful for him. And if a team's worried about that, they have to ban one thing to lock him out of his comfort pool for, because he's not going to play Elise. And if he does, he's just literally going to get destroyed.
yeah. So like it just comes down to one thing, and that team needs to like stabilize whatever and start playing well. And of course, now that we've hit the like halfway point in that split, you're gonna see them really just try to play just go try hard in that sense, and not play these random picks that they have no business playing. They're not even random. They're good picks, but they can't play the picks. Like they can't play them. Then sure, just like move away from them. And like the one shining star, like shining point of that team has always been that bottom lane. Wushin and Lei have always been performing at all points. They like against IG, they completely dominated that lane. So it's like, and Kid and Kitties are not like Kid and Kitties. I love those names, but they're not pushovers. Like they're good. Like they're really
They're
good.
really good.
So that team needs to figure itself out. Wushin just like do it. Like Wushin and Lei just do whatever. Like continue playing their hearts out. God bless, and they'll find their point. I don't know.
I think so. The one thing I want to talk about before we move on to other teams, most notably IG and OMG this week. We've talked a lot about in the earlier season about like why these top tier teams were underperforming, and a lot of the reason that it's been explained to me, once again, not a China expert, but what reason it's been explained to me, or how it's been explained to me rather, is that these teams, the season is ridiculously long. Like they have to play such a large quantity of games. Some of the times, like when players are messing around, it might be because they don't want to burn out, or they're just using this early portion of the split to experiment. Well, we're 5 weeks in now. We're almost like out of 11. And now it feels like you mentioned with King, like they're out of options. They have no more time to experiment, and it feels like we're going to see that across the board. So do you feel like from this week forward, the games in LPL are just going to be much more competitive, or are we still going to see these kind of hit-miss games where some teams just don't appear to be showing up? That's a very intense question. I don't expect you to answer that like with 100% confidence, but just like
Oh, sorry. Just repeated it, I guess. I kind of missed it, I think.
do you think the competitive quality of matches is going to improve as we move further and further along in the LPL?
Yes and no. Yes and no, because they're going to be like this actually happened. Like this happens so often. Even like last year. I'm not sure if last year had less games. I'm pretty sure it did. Yeah, it definitely did. But like it just depends on the teams, because what you ended up seeing was teams that had a comfortable lead, like EDG especially. And OMG, they're just like, oh, we are definitely in the playoffs. We're not going to do anything. Like that compels them to play even worse in that sense and just experiment.
Oh my god.
And they had like Vagar bottom lane and both like and Urgot Nasus and I don't know, I don't remember which team that was
Hey.
actually, but you just saw even worse bullshit as the season progressed or like, as the splits progressed, and you're like, okay. And then you saw bottom tier teams just fighting for their lives at the same time. So that's actually near the end of the split that you start seeing like worse teams take games off of like these god tier teams because they while the B tier teams start like trying to play extremely seriously to like keep relevance, try and make it into the playoffs or just not get relegated. You saw top teams like just not give a fuck. Just they didn't care, and so you just see half and half in that sense.
It's, I mean, I'm hoping I think if it follows the same pattern as it did last year, Snake might actually end up in above fifth place because if they keep trying, I'm hoping. I hope they don't like get cocky. Sorry to randomly take us to the Snake area. It's just the team I love. But like, you know, if they realize that they're not very good and that they're just winning games because people aren't like really playing against them very well, you know, like maybe if they take the rest of these games seriously, I'll finally get to see Snake like third place
No.
Snake, or they'll start fucking
No.
around and they will lose every game forever because they're not that good and they should not have been winning this many games in the first place.
The only thing I want to say about Snake is I don't think they're bad necessarily,
Yeah.
but I do think I legitimately like I went through this weird like Snake boot camp where I watched for an article I wrote like all these previous games and talked to bugged Raz about it, and I think that they're doing really well, but I don't think that with the players they have on that team, I don't think that they can continue to do well if the top tier teams start playing them a little bit more seriously. If they ban out, for example, like
Xerath. Well, okay, so here's the thing.
but it's not just that. It's they're playing in a really specific style to make sure that they play around the fact that Crystal straight up is just not the best AD carry. And so if they continue to do that, I think that other teams are going to figure them out. And I'm not sure if that array of players can play to another style that well in order to be at the top, like to remain at the top of the standings.
So here's my thing about Snake in general, and this is my least biased interpretation of Snake. Snake is interesting to me because as a team, all of their weakness, or the majority of their weakness, is in those two players, Baka and his limited champion pool, and obviously Crystal and the fact that he's a giant feeder. Like that's pretty much what it is. Like he does stupid shit and he feeds. Whereas like most of the teams that we look at in like NA and EU have like small weaknesses scattered across the thing that turn into big weaknesses in like longer games or in certain situations. Whereas Snake like has the same weaknesses all the time. They're both really big and obvious, but if you don't cater to them, like if you don't play well against them or like ban Xerath and like camp the shit out of Crystal, right? If you camp Crystal and ban Xerath, you're going to win it feels like you're going to win every game against Snake, right? But if you fail to do one of those things, it feels like Snake will win every time. So they have glaringly obvious weaknesses on two players, and it feels like that is even worse than a team, at least to me, than a team with like small weaknesses across the board.
Well, I
Snake-
think that
I want to just say that Snake is a team that I think I looked more and more into how they play, how they like where they obviously like I knew where they came from, but like they've always had the same style, but I've wondered, well, how did they succeed? And yeah, sure, like Beast and Ella has been like upgraded versions and ward so like they ward so often and like peel so well, but it comes down to the team. Like, yeah, Beast and Ella has worked really well for this sense into achieving this, but like the meta has moved in their favor, 100%. Like, while the meta has moved away from King's favor, in which they need to like adapt, and they've failed to do so, EDG. God, yeah, where did I come with EDG? Snake has. I don't know.
Nice. Nice
Snake
one.
They're like the
has-
same team, right, Raz? That's what you're saying on the record?
No.
EDG, Snake, very similar.
No.
Kelsey's
They're a team
gonna
that hasn't
kill
had to
you.
move.
Kelsey
They're a
Moore's
team
gonna
that
come
has-
after you.
I just want to say that this team has barely had to move because they've had the same playstyle. They've actually tweaked it a bit, and so Flandre starts playing like legitimate champions in the sense that like now they
No more
don't have a
Phil Top?
weakness. Like no Fizz top, no Yasuo top, none of that BS.
I enjoyed
Like
the fifth top, to be
80
honest.
wasn't it
it's
80
fine.
LeBlanc? That one was my
He
favorite.
Yeah, the
played
80
80
LeBlanc.
Yep, I was a
They
fan.
they
But he was
start
like
like
the original Fizz top. Like that was his,
exactly.
he was like a Fizz main.
Is it
almost.
okay? But
Yeah.
here's the other thing we have to consider: is Fizz top viable again? Because I've heard it's pretty strong.
Yeah, now you have to go the other direction to go in AD. That's gonna be interesting. Like, but like
Hey, Fondre, you
Snake,
can finally play Fizz again.
but yeah, Snake hasn't moved. They haven't. They had the same style, and so they haven't needed to move. Like it's always been the same. Because they've always had a scaling AD carry. They've always had a wave clear mid champion. They've always had a carry top laner, and they've always had. Actually, their jungler's just been Reborn. Just usually just played Lee Sin and like Elise, and so now they've changed their jungler in which it fits the style a lot more. And the reason why it fits so perfectly is because games are going to last longer. They're not going to be like 20-minute stomp fest like it did back then. So suddenly his scaling 80 carry picks, his Callista now, like now they made a champion that really works perfectly for his playstyle. They have Callista, he has Tristana, he has Kog'Maw still. Like he was a main Kog'Maw player. So he can play those champions, he can just coast to the late game. And on top of that, now you have like the protection from Nunu Jungle, who is always actually relevant. Like his objective control is perfect in a long game. That's really great for the meta. And of course his peeling late game is just off the charts for him.
Ridiculous.
And then of course, yeah, and then now you have like the wave clear from Baka that has always been there. He's played the Ziggs, he's played like
Xerath.
basically anything that like and Xerath. And then suddenly, like, it's worked for his favor. Like, all you can do is just, like, stall out, wave clear, like, poke. Poke in China. Pretty big deal. so, so it's a big factor. And now you have Rumble coming out of Flandre because he can play just about every champion. Like, I don't even know if how many games he's played on it, but he's like, I'm going to pick up this champion now. And just suddenly he's like a god at the champion. And so that team has really been able to adapt to the meta and they haven't had to move. Like it just works really well with them. So now the real question is what happens if the meta actually moves into like an assassin based meta? Like will they just fall back into whatever mediocrity they had before or will they adapt? And I don't think they will adapt, but that's just something we have to wait on.
Baka having both his hands may have something to do with it too. Yeah, gotta give.
Maybe.
God,
He'd
this
be
game-
cool with one hand.
Oh my god, I'm never gonna let it go. Like if anyone ever questions my fanboying for Snake, I'm like he beat cool with one hand.
God.
You back
It's
the
just
fuck
like
up
I-
when you're talking about. He may only play one character, but he can play it with one hand. I don't give a shit how many characters he can play. He needs
Can
both
Faker
hands
do
for
that?
each and every one of
Huh?
those.
His Azir wasn't bad. Like, in
Yeah,
his,
Azir.
I mean, Azir is kind of like stupidly powerful right now, anyway. But and like
And
to
it
be
also
honest,
goes-
in the games where they forced him back onto Syndra because he was a Syndra player, like obviously she's kind of bad right now, but he didn't like he wasn't a huge weak spot. It was more that he just didn't have the same carry potential because he wasn't just sniping people from the back line all day.
And the thing with Azir is that like it also was a perfect thing for the meta in that sense. It worked out for him because it was the same exact idea that Xerath had in terms of wave clear upon wave clear. And then it worked perfectly for team fights because then you can have the same the wave clear and the zone that already worked extremely well for a hyper carry and a Nunu. So that in my opinion is literally the best composition you can have in this meta. Is Callista, Nunu,
Azir.
like Rumble in top lane, and of course Azir, and like that is the best composition you can run right now, and that just like fits perfectly with their playstyle. So I don't know if they're gonna change, but I think that team's good. They used to like for me they were 100% like the shittiest team, but like now they just like it bounced back because they had better players replace their old ones, and now they have the meta picks. So it's like okay.
Carried by Umbrella, Ella.
Ella.
Let's look at another team also underperforming. I think we could argue OMG, the star roster, the paper perfect roster, as we've talked
Yeah.
about so much all night. Bringing on Uzi, we've talked a lot about them and how they haven't really been utilizing Uzi very well. How they haven't been. It doesn't look like they've been taking games seriously. now the pressure's on. We're past the halfway point. We know they've now hired an esports psychologist. Maybe work out some of the issues with Uzi and the team. I don't know. I'm hesitant on the OMG bandwagon. But I think they have the potential. Where do we think OMG is going to be in the coming weeks? Can we expect them to step up their performance? If we had the perfect theoretical esports psychologist to solve all their interpersonal problems, would they be one of the best? Would they be the best team in China? Like, what can we expect? I guess is my question.
Forever number 2. Like, there are maybe even like I think LGD will even overtake them at some point. I think OMG's always they're a really strong team, obviously, like in that star factor. That every lane's gonna like out CS the enemy team, and then they'll have if they run Sivir, they'll run this extremely special composition or at least playstyle in which they'll just like take every tower by like as fast as possible, and they'll have that gold lead. But they'll just brute force their advantages, and then until they find a smarter way to play, teams that already have that skill in the lanes will start to overtake them. In terms of strategy, or like they'll just overtake them in the games. So I don't think OMG will change until even this. Sure, a psychologist helps, but it'll only help if Cloud is back on the team. Like if that's what the sole reason for a psychologist. But like they need like some actual legitimate strategy going, like not legitimate, but like actual form of team play strategy, etc. Like something smart. Or they just need another better player, and that isn't Luo. So,
I don't really know much about OMG other than I watch Uzi farm more in his own lane when they win. I watch that when they win and when they lose. It's just like his thing, right? Or he plays Vayne, I guess. Yeah, it's an interesting team overall. I was hoping that I'm hoping that as this esports psychologist thing moves forward, we'll get more information about it. I don't know if we will or not, though. That's not really something we hear about too much in esports. Even when teams do have esports psychologists, we don't hear about that progress in those interpersonal relationships. Just obviously something that organizations don't put out, which, makes sense from a business standpoint, I suppose. The last team in LPL we're going to talk about tonight is going to be IG and their evolution, as you've referred to it, Raz. Mm-hmm. So walk us through this one. Walk us through IG.
IG has just been moving and changing throughout the split. They've been a team. You look at, okay, something that's not really relevant to the team is their old IG, in which they've always been that team that has no strategy. They just like see the typical see hero kill hero style. They have random picks but like they'll always just fight. Like it doesn't matter what they pick. They'll have something crazy like Zilean, which was like oh wow, someone's playing Zilean. Like this is the first time he's actually seen it was at a Zitai. And you'll see a Skarner pick or like a Fiddlesticks pick, but it didn't matter what they picked because they'll play the same way. So like that was old IG, and the new IG was like you bring in Kakao, you bring in Rookie, and you bring in Pokemon, God bless his soul, and you're like, what is this team like and what is team gonna do? And the team used to like play the old like I guess comfort style. They try to play like you'd see Rookie with some other random champ. Sometimes Yasuo, and you'll see Vi coming out of Kakao as he tries to play make for the team. And then you just see slowly but surely the team start to go like change faces, like kind of like Professor Quirrell, where he turns around and you see Voldemort's face. And you're like, what? That's not IG. What happened to them? Like now you start seeing like a significantly slower paced game. You see Nunu, like Cal's playing Nunu. You see Cassiopeia out of like the scaling Cassiopeia out of Rookie, and you're like, this team is playing a much slower objective game. Their games are going to end at like 40-50 minute mark, and that's just IG now. Like they're changing, they're evolving, and it's a good way to play. They're starting to win more games and be a lot more consistent.
And that's I'm excited to see that. I'm gonna miss the See Hero Kill Hero. I feel like that was like they were one of the teams that like defined the Chinese identity internationally as like an aggressive region, was obviously IG's old play style. But I think it's good for China overall that they're not doing that anymore, because obviously it's not always right. And in fact, this season I think it would be rarely right to play that way with the way that team comps have been working out. But it does give me hope for them as a team moving forward. Where do you think they're going to place, just as a general?
Probably fifth Fourth is like looking up. for that.
Remember, Snake is in fifth right now on our
Exactly.
predictions, and so I guess fourth or sixth, or is Snake going to be in fourth?
Sixth.
You have to move Snake
You
up.
never know. You gotta
That's
like.
the real question. Are you gonna bump up my
that's the
team
thing.
or lower them?
Yeah, that's the only thing I care about is where are you putting Snake.
I just think like it depends on how IG is gonna take picks and bans because with now Azir being a non-factor with how hard the nerfs hit him, I feel like if they start to the way they play picks and bans can really help them out. And I think IG is moving upwards in the sense that they're already in a decent position and now they're playing better. So I can see them at the very most going fourth. But realistically, I'd say fifth place is where they will head. It'll be like EDG, OMG, LGD, and Snake, and then fifth will be IG.
I think that's fair. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll know more. Obviously, this week is another huge week for the majority of the teams we've talked about. I think you said King has another 3-game week, or a 3-set week, rather.
Yeah.
Which will be exciting to see. Maybe King will finally step it up, and then we can actually say good things about them instead of just being like, well, disappointed. As,
It's like-
again...
Like, I want to move to like the experimenting thing because that's a really good 3 sets is a lot. That's 6 games in 1 week, and like
Potentially
that's when you start to,
6.
yeah, and it's like you ask the players, and I don't remember who was interviewed in saying this. Like I think it was an LGD player. I think it was PL. I can't say for certain, but they asked them, "How do you take 6-game weeks? Or at least 3-set weeks? How do you take them?" And you were like, well, it's okay, but we take them more like scrims than anything. And then you ask, you really start to process that information. You start thinking about it, and that's just how it is. There are so many games in a split that teams will just kind of they lose. It loses value. The games lose value 100%, and so you don't have the exciting OGN games of old in which you're like, whoa, if they lose this set, it's over for this team. They can't win. They're done for. They won't go to Worlds if they lose to this one team. And then with now it's just okay, we'll play every team twice. We'll play for King right now. They're gonna play 12 games in 2 weeks, and you're they just that's gonna burn you out. They're already experimenting with certain picks, and so they just it loses meaning and teams analysts will start looking into the region and they'll be like, wow, these teams are looking weak. We used to hype up China, but they're going with Lux picks and Veigar picks. Oh, that's really weird. They're looking kind of messy in their rotations. Oh, but it's just these teams start losing fucks. They had a lot of fucks to give, and they just as the split goes on, they just
Wow.
lost a lot of fucks as it goes on.
Oh my goodness.
There's so many ways to say that, and you chose that one, and that's it's just
I know,
perfect.
that's the best.
They can only care so much. They only have so much patience. They only have so many fucks, and they're losing fucks. It's they started with 10 and they're losing 2 fucks every when they
it's they're throwing dollar fucks in the air, man. It's all right, I'm having too much fun
Make
with
it rain.
that. Make it rain.
OMG looking like a 2 fucks team. Can't imagine they're gonna care too much about this.
Just granting the amount of fucks they
New
can
way to
give.
rate China.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
All right. I would love if in our VODs we had to bleep things out and Mike just has to go through and this entire section is just one giant, just
Yeah.
giant, just mutes the entire section just to be yeah, this is
Like-
not worth the time.
Just movements. What is he saying, right?
Just axes it.
He can't.
Never gets seen.
Oh my god.
All
The
right.
loss.
Well, I'm excited to see this experimentation from King. I'm hoping it'll go better this coming week,
Yeah, hopefully.
so that for once my China predictions will come true. Maybe Snake will get 5th and everything will be
No.
all right with the world.
Instant gratification is playoffs, and then King just gets first place, and I was like, I told y'all bitches, I told you. It's they're the greatest. But now
Well-
I'm just in hiding.
The easiest way to get instant gratification would, of course, at this point be to put your bets on the GE Tigers in Korea. Still undefeated, still looking strong.
Woo, G Tigers.
GE Tigers.
Mhm.
I mean, they played their set versus SKT. It was shaky a little bit. It was a little back and forth there for a bit.
I don't think it was shaky as much as it was, SKT actually did play better in that set than I'd seen them play in a while, to be honest. Particularly their pick bans were a lot more solid than they have been. But, I mean, that was whole, like, the narrative for me, just because I love pick ban, was kind of Nofe throwing out, like, a little bit of trash for the game against Coma, and, like, the best part is, like, Nofe comes into the booth and he's, like, all dressed up, and then Coma comes in a t-shirt. Looks like he just got out of bed, you know? No, I think the reason why GE Tigers have been so successful, though, is in their pick bans, and not necessarily because Nofe is a god and Coma is garbage, because that's not what I'm saying. It's that he knows, like, GE Tigers, they kind of stretched out their team a bit in terms of what they've been showing, but they still play a very, like, he knows what the players need to win, and therefore goes into pick bans with that specific mindset. So, like, here's what we're going to do as a team, and you can see it. You can see that he knows his players, he knows what champions they're best on, he knows what compositions to run specifically with that team. And I think that's one of the reasons why they've been so successful. Like they're the opposite. They haven't tried anything super loopy or funky or like, hey guys, let's randomly go with this composition because like
Let's first pick Xerath. Sorry.
Still, just got it.
Okay, so this is my SKT theory. By the way, this is like they tried to force like the Xerath skirmish comp so many times, and I feel like that's Kakoma like knowing his team is strong. Like this is my hope, I guess. This is my really far out hope.
He's just like whatever, we're just using this.
He's like I know we can just beat everyone if we take this seriously, but let's try some new things. Let's try to be one step ahead. And it didn't work. And he's like, okay, well let's try it 3 or 4 more times just to make sure. And now they're gonna be serious all the time forever.
I mean, I still think, and I know I am known for on social media and in other chats, like pooping all over Bengi. Like I know I am. Like at the beginning of the season, Bengi, everyone's like, man, Bengi looks so good. I'm like, that's because he's on freaking Warwick. And he's like,
did you see him walk into lane and gank for that Lissandra?
Yeah, like,
those two characters with targeted CC lockdown? It's beautiful.
Oh my god.
Like I don't think that because they can't do that same season 3 style, I think that they still sometimes struggle, especially when the meta starts to shift, and it could shift back into their favor, who knows. But like right now, I still see Bengi as a huge liability for that team because he doesn't, like, to be honest, and I know we're going to talk about them later, but like I feel like Score applies more pressure than Bengi does, and his team has been losing left and right. So
your blind love for KT aside, I agree with I
don't pick a fight with Emily about KT. She will like rip your eyes out.
She knows more about KT than I ever will, and she will just totally just destroy me. But I will say that like, despite the fact that I think sometimes you may be a little bit biased in the realm of KT, and I think a Score as a jungler especially.
Maybe bias.
Score as a jungler.
I made a joke about Score, and she threatened to gouge my eyes out.
Well. Score is performing better than Bang. Not that, but I'm gonna say that that's like not saying much because I agree. Bangi's underperforming, and Score is I guess you know that is better than underperforming.
Here's the thing. I honestly think that SKT only has so many ways that they can go and so many things that they can do with Bengi as a jungler, even though they have the best player in the world on that team. Like that's my issue with SKT. Like it could be true. Like feel free to come back at me and be like, Emily, you were totally wrong. You're making stuff up, whatever. If the next split they go through and just start dominating people in picks and bans and stop first picking Xerath and stop subbing in Easy Hoon, because no offense, I have nothing against Easy Hoon, but Faker's a better player, and there's nothing that Easy Hoon can really do for the team, in my opinion, that Faker can't. And that's where it comes down for me. It's not that Easy Hoon's a bad player. It's that when comparing these two players that you're going to be subbing in side by side, unless there's some weird chemistry issue that I don't know about and no one knows about, there's no reason to put in Easyhoon over Faker, because there's nothing that there's nothing that Easyhoon can do that Faker can't.
Yeah,
And-
and Easyhoon's champion pool is also just in general much smaller. He may play. Might even argue that sometimes Easyhoon is better at certain champions than
He's
Faker.
a specialist. That's what
Yeah.
Easyhoon to me.
Which is a weakness.
He's become a specialist, and that's not a bad thing. But if you're comparing what player you're going to put in, you're going to put in the player with more versatility, who is
The jack of all trades, master of all of them. Yeah.
Hey, you're putting him in over Easyhoon in a serious game situation. That's one of the reasons why you saw him against GE. Like, I just don't see where that team can go as 5 with Bengi as their jungler. I do think a bright spot, however, has also been Peekaboo. Like, Peekaboo has played very well.
Peekaboo's good, yeah.
Wolf underperformed. Like, going into the season, I was like, I love Wolf. Like, I think he's really great. He was awful. I mean, he's not good. So I think if there's a bright spot in, like, assessing that team, where they're moving forward, I think it's definitely Peekaboo. I think he's been, like all of Dom's, like, trumpeting about this player constantly, like the Peekaboo hype train. Like, I think he's lived up to expectations. I think he's done really well. I think he's a bright spot on that team for where they want to go moving forward. But I honestly don't see how creative you can get or what kind of team you want to be with Bengi in the jungle.
I remember like someone saying it on Twitter. I think it was God, I don't remember his name. So I'm just gonna go on with it. I think like it's funny. Look at the history of SKT as an organization, and it's like the only role that hasn't been swapped out or tested. Oh,
Yeah,
Fine. Yeah, there we go. Fine.
Bengi is the only player that hasn't been.
Yeah, and you're like Bengi out of everybody. Like Bengi is the one who stayed true to that team. And like we
It's just weird
value
because
him
like
so
we
much.
know Kakoma loves Easyhoon and he keeps bringing Easyhoon in and like built a team around Easyhoon in the form of SKT's sister team last season. But fucking Bengi is the one who just is never under the spotlight anyway. He's just like, yeah, I mean he's all right. I guess we'll keep him here. I'm
I'm
more
just so
worried about
confused. Like, what does he
Easyhoon.
bring to this team that like just puts him above all other consideration? I don't really get it. I mean, Bengi problems aside, I do wish they would just stick with one mid laner. I don't care if it's Faker. I don't care if it's Easyhoon. Stick with one.
Yeah.
I mean, I care. I want it to be Faker. What the hell? Of course,
No,
why
but
don't
you
you
gotta
care?
gotta make the decision because I feel like that's always been a problem with teams, especially in China. It's like, hey, we could have rotating rosters, right? We lost the game because of like lacking synergy or that awkward point in which we kind of wanted this player to come at this certain time, but hey, he just wasn't in sync with us.
What if you can
Having
swap
rotating
players out
rosters can make
mid-game?
sense if you pull it off well, but like when it comes down to team dynamics itself, it's very risky.
Yeah, it's probably the most riskiest thing you can do. Like you can pull it off in basketball like pretty well and fine, like but you understand by here's the thing, if you pull it off in basketball, you understand by benching one of your players, your main roster players for someone else who's on the bench, you run the risk of losing a lot. Not so much synergy, but at the same time you'll start losing the game, control of the game. Like what you're doing is you're putting on a player just simply to rest the other player. Like in any like in any situation, if you had like if no player could ever get fatigued at any point, you'd be like, well, I'm running this like these 5 players every time. like in this situation, why would I take them out? Like there's no reason for it. But then people are trying to make that distinction between sports, like real sports and esports. And you simply cannot make that distinction, in my opinion, because these players are going physically throughout the entire game, the length of a game, which is pretty fucking long, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these players, they play a game, like it's 40 minutes, right? It could be exhausting, that's true, but after that game, you're done. And maybe even after that game, you have a break in which you can go to the next game.
And
But,
let's
mhm.
let's look at like soccer, right? Like where
Yeah.
okay, you have huge teams, obviously, teams that get to practice together more than you're gonna have a lot a lot of players that you can move in and out over the course of a game. All of those players have been trained on the plays that you have. The plays that you have function the same way every time they're executed. How players interpret and adapt, obviously, as the things change, does change. But for the most part, all of the things and all of the factors are the same. Like, you eliminate so many variables in traditional sports based on the way that you practice and the way that you teach players plays, right? But, like, interpersonal relationships are important in that sense, but a lot less important because at the end of the day, like, I'm not talking to the most of my team. You know what I mean? I'm calling for the ball if I want the ball, and if they don't give it to me, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing in the play, and that's it. Like, that's the interaction that I have. I don't have to go, I'm going in, trust me, go in with me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going in on this team fight, trust that I'm going to get it, land all my shit, and, like, do it. Like, I think the level of interpersonal relationships required in traditional sports is a lot less intensive, at least for the most part.
And you'll see those, like, especially in soccer, you'll just see those, like, replay moments, like, highlight moments, and we're like, holy shit, how did this team orchestrate this massive play, like, and, like, without actually, obviously, like, planning it out, and you're like, well, they've been together, et cetera, but, like, that, with sports, you can do that, but it comes at the risk of your own play, right? And that's the same thing with League of Legends in the sense that, like, you don't have that much factor of fatigue, so stick with the same players, and if you have a problem, then you can bench them based on how poorly they're playing. That's when you can bench them, not just willy-nilly, like Flame, like the difference between Flame and Acorn, and maybe they're just trying to find out which fits best for the team, but you're risking, like, your standings, you're risking games, because it's like, it's not going to be good for you.
And the way advantages are accrued in League of Legends, like, and the way players are swapped, it's in between games, right? So, like, you can't swap players at the point where, even if you could swap players mid-game, let's say, like, okay, we don't like the way you're playing Acorn, let's swap in Flame. Like, Flame, we like his style better on this champion in a specific instance. Flame is still jumping into a game, I mean, if they're swapping, and probably down gold, probably not in the best position. The rest of the team is maybe upset or cranky. Like, the factors of swapping players in LoL just are not similar in any way, shape, or form. Like, they're not comparable. So when you try to, like, do things like we would see in a traditional sport, like swap players in between games and things like that, like, unless, like, Faker loses in lane in game 1 and is really toxic and is, like, upset and cranky, like, I wouldn't bring in either. There's no reason, right? Like, unless if Faker's on tilt, like, by all means swap him out. Like, if you're comfortable with both those players enough, do that. Like, that'll improve team mentality, and I think that's a really cool option that you have. But, like, it's just not, in the long run, it still feels like that risk and like that gamble to keep things how they are.
Yeah.
The other thing to consider is that the skill repertoire of an esports player, or specifically League of Legends or Dota, compared to a physical sport, is dramatically different. In basketball, passing, dribbling, shooting, and basic team, like, formations, I guess. Whereas in any role in League, it's like, okay, top lane, you wave control, lane matchups, champion pool, team fighting, rotations, and mid lane, it's the same thing. Support, you have to, be able to time cooldowns, manage wave, protect your carry, team fight as well, peel for your carry, control vision. I think I might have already said that. There's so much different
there's just
skill
too many
sets.
variables.
And your role can change frequently too, depending on the meta, like the champions that you play and the thing.
Exactly.
And, like, the meta in basketball or in another sport does change too, but the ways that it changed are different because the game of soccer, the rules of soccer never change. Right,
exactly.
They are always the same.
There are no patch notes.
Technically, exactly. Patch notes are one of the huge changing factors, which means at any given point, whatever skill you've been practicing, whatever champion you've been practicing, or the way you've been playing and practicing the game could be changed completely. Yeah, just completely. Like, when they changed the way towers worked, like last season, the meta changed constantly. Like, Riot was so unhappy with the 4VO push meta, they changed it constantly. Some of the changes worked, some of the changes different, but it was always shifting. Like, every month we would see the meta change, not completely, but a lot. You know?
Which is why I always hate when people try to try to break down the differences and be like, see, esports is a lot like actual sports, competitive sports. Let's look at these two teams. They're completely different, and that's not to say that esports is any way lesser. It's a mind game. It's really, really, like, it's very competitive, like, extremely competitive. But they're two different beasts. You don't see the NBA going like, man, the balance issues of this court. We need to lessen, these 2-pointers are too valuable. We need to make
the
it
ball
so
is too small.
Dude, the ball is too small. Increase the size. 3-pointers. Let's make them 4-pointers. Let's make them work for that ball. So it's like, well, make it more exciting. You don't see that happening because, hey, like obviously there's a lot of differences in that sense. So
Also, because
like, you gotta
there's
respect
only
the
so
differences.
much you can change about a physical sport.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that approach. I mean, I think that patch notes make League like an interesting and dynamic game. I love it personally to watch from a perspective. If basketball or soccer did that, I would fucking hate it. Like they are different things. Like you
Yeah.
just can't. You can compare them in the same way, and that like the pressures are very similar, but the skill sets and everything else are completely different.
There we go.
All right.
Yeah, it's just SCT.
All right. Well,
Stop putting in easy hoon. I
Jesse,
mean,
stop putting it
actually,
on.
there is one thing I did want to ask
Free
you guys.
easy
So
hoon.
just right. I know he could do so well on another team. Why? I'm wondering. I'm trying to wrap my head around this Bengi thing still. I'm wondering if it's just because with so many junglers leaving, if there's not a lot of jungle talent. Because like you had Score going into the jungle for KT. And like as much as I actually
for CJ.
do like that decision, yeah, ambition. So I'm wondering if they're just kind of stuck with Bengi now for the
Well,
rest of
I
the
I
year.
guess that's possible.
I mean, a lot of teams Samsung as a team, literally the entire team is a gamble. Like, let's take 5 basically solo queue players and put them on a team. I mean, obviously it's not quite that, but it's pretty much that. It's a
Yeah.
gamble. And I understand if SKT wants to take like a player that they know, which is Bengi. Like, yeah, Bengi's not great, but they know that Bengi's not great and they can account for that. Whereas a new player, like, you can pretty much expect that he's not going to perform on, the high level that you need him to. But you don't know what his quirks are going to be, how he's going to react under pressure, what he's going to do. And it's like, it's the lesser of two evils, I guess. You take the one you
I
know as
just will
opposed to
go with Bengi.
I guess we'll have him. Yeah. Yeah.
This is the
SKT.
sound of settling. Bengi.
Love
Huh.
that song, by the way. All right. Well, okay. So we were going to talk a little bit about KT, a little bit more tonight about Score Jungle, but I think we're going to cut the show short. It's been about 2.5 hours since we've started. Thank you guys, everyone who has watched the show and stuck with us for the whole time, or just for those of you who've turned in for KR, LPL, or otherwise, stuff for your specific regions. Thanks for putting up with the technical difficulties. This has been episode 20 of Into the Rift. I, as I'm always, as your host, joining me tonight, once again, is Emily, Steve, the Stampede, Noog the Stampede, and Raz, here to talk to us about LPL and teach us all the things. So thank you guys so much for watching. The hat tip. Oh, God. All right. Before we tip any more, well, hold on. I gotta get mine in too.
Oh, I can't because my camera's off now.
So camera can't
I
turn
don't
on.
have
Your
a
internet's
hat.
lagging or Hitbox is messed up. Anyway, I'm sure Steve tips his hat too.
I'll
My
tip
viewers.
my icon or
My
something.
viewers. We wish you all a good night, and we'll see you guys next week.
Good night.